live screen to be started, please.
We're live, Chair.
Mine. Great. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board being held on Friday, the 7th of October 2022. So some housekeeping matters to deal with first. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please I ask you to speak as clearly as possible and keep the background noise to a minimum. Can you also please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent? Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. So in terms of the procedure and etiquette for the meeting, only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. And for those people in attendance as virtual participants, can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute. So if we move forwards onto the agenda, our agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have an apologies from Councillor Philip Howes. Do I have any other apologies? No, and I don't believe Councillor Howes had a name substitute. Is that correct?
We don't have any substitutes, and some members of the committee, of course, joining online virtually.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any members who may wish to declare an interest in respect to items on the agenda? No, great. Agenda item 4, the minutes should be contained in pages 9 to 14 of your agenda pack. Are there any? I haven't received any proposed amendments. Are there any from members? Are you all in agreement that we can approve the minutes? Can you raise your hands, please? Thank you. Agenda items 5 and 6, questions from members of the public and questions from members of the council. I don't believe we have received any. Can you confirm, please?
There's no questions received from the public.
Thank you.
Or the 4 councillors.
Great. Agenda item 7 then, body of the meeting for today, budget scrutiny. So you'll find these papers on pages 15 to 56 of the report pack. And I believe we have Councillor Liz Harvey being Cabinet Member of Finance, Corporate Services and Planning in attendance, together with Andrew Lovegrove, Director of Resources and Assurance, and shortly we also will have Rachel Hart, Head of Strategic Finance. So this item is to consider the progress of the development of the 23-24 budget proposals. The item is part of the board's scrutiny of the council's budget, including the emerging budget priorities, positioning assumptions and risks informing the development of the budget proposals for 23-24. Also included in the appendix of the report are the cover reports for the end of year budget performance for 21-22 and Q1 22-23, the details of which have already been published in the cabinet papers. And also I understand the clerk emailed to you this week all the appendices as well, which weren't included in the published report pack. So what I would like to do is firstly invite the Director of Resources and Assurance to present the key issues for the development of the 22-23 budget and present the report. I then would like to break our discussions up into 2 sections, if that's agreeable to everybody. Firstly, to look at end of year budget performance for 21-22 and Q1 22-23. So aligning that to our work programme, where we wanted to look at sort of where we got to and set the scene then to have a second discussion on questions on the development of the 23-24 budget, which will form the bulk of what is in the officer's report. I'd like to conclude after each of those sections, and then we can move on to the next item if that's agreeable to everybody. So I invite the Director of Resources and Assurance to present his papers, please.
Thank you, Jack. There is a short presentation included, so it's probably better if I go through that just to set the scene of where we are in terms of next year's budget. So it's possible to share that. Next slide, please.
Mr. Lovegrove, I've given you co-host permission, so hopefully you should be able to.
Okay. Well, bear with me.
And for those who cannot see a screen, it should be Appendix 1 of your report pack.
Okay. So, Chair, the budget for next year is quite challenging. Most budgets are quite challenging for local government, but I think next year is going to be a little bit more challenging than normal. And the last public statement really for what government is intending to do for local government was made by the then Secretary of State back in July. That's saying that the local government settlement for the next 2 years will be flat cash. So there was a budget the year before where they set out the 3-year settlement for local government. And that's the last public statement we've had about that. So clearly that was before some of the global events that are happening. So that's the last public statement. We've had further rises in the bank interest rates coming through. We had the fiscal event or budget, 23rd of September. There was no mention, or very little mention there about local government. So at the moment, we don't quite know what government is minded to do for local government settlements on there. But we do know ourselves as a council, our residents, our businesses are facing quite significant cost of living challenges, energy costs. And we've had the support that's been announced by government for both residents and businesses recently, but there's still a very large problem going through on that. And this all boils down to the impact of inflation. We're all feeling that as consumers, as individuals, as organisations, businesses. We are seeing prices rising in just about every area where we spend our money, and that's partly why a lot of our households have a cost of living challenge. The problem we have in local government, the current model of funding local government doesn't really allow for a transition to an inflation-driven environment. Had 30 plus years of a very benign inflation environment, hopefully that is quite different on that. And a fair chunk of our base budget is funded from 3 main income streams. Council tax, which we set and we collect. The retention of business rates, which is a national scheme. So we administer it on behalf of government, but they set all the parameters, they manage the calculations, they manage the businesses, the rate of value of those things, and we just get given an allocation from them. And we get some grant from them as well. So this slide is just putting that into context. So just over 30% of our income every year comes from government grants and retained business rates, which we have no ability to influence. And at the moment, the message from government, they will stay the same, so we will not have an increase in those areas. Just over 68% of our income comes from council tax, which is within our gift to raise. On there, government typically set a referendum limit. So if councils want to raise council tax above that, then we have to have a formal referendum. So we have to ask our population whether they would agree to that or not. If they do, clearly we then apply the higher rate. If they don't, we have to.
Could I just ask a question quickly?
Yes.
This referendum, I'm just wondering, to let people know, residents know that we are in difficulty, would it be worthwhile going to a referendum just to get some feedback from the residents, period, so we know where we're going in the future? Oh, so they know where they're going. We put out a referendum. I know it costs money, but I think it's worthwhile keeping the residents involved more than we have done. Anyway, just my feeling.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Chair.
No, that's clear. And I think these are very important points, which I think are addressed in the core of the report. So if we can perhaps, if it's okay with members, if we can let Mr. Lovegrove finish and then we can move on, that would be great. Thank you.
It's a very valid question. Well, cost inflation is likely to be double digits for certainly the foreseeable future, and we can, different economics experts will talk about how long, but for the purpose of the council, we're seeing it for short to medium term. And that has quite an impact on a budget where the income raising is pretty limited. So we say on this slide, it's the perfect storm of inflation and the need to invest in children's services. So we have a challenge as a council. We have a disconnect between the increases in funding and our costs, and our costs are being driven by inflation. You'll see in the detail of the report, we've got lots of tables summarising the impact of inflation across our wages bill, what we pay for suppliers for goods and services, all the supply chain, all those costs coming through, fuel costs, those kind of things. So that means that our gap predicted for next year is just over £28 million. Part of that's pressures. We've got some income funding increases that we can, that gives us net 21 million plus. That does include an assumption about 4.6 million extra for children's services. And that was discussed in March and April when we talked about the additional monies for children. So that's included in there. At the moment, without any further indication of support from government, we can't balance the books. And that's a difficult message to give. That's the reality on that. So we are going to have to, and we are looking at ways to make changes, to make savings on that. And we'll have to be very clear to you as councils that could have an impact on frontline services. We all hope we won't, but to be clear at this point, that is a risk that we all face. We're not unique. Just about every council in England is having a similar issue. Probably all read the press reports about councils in Clare. The leader of Hampshire Council has been very clear. They face a £200 million gap. Neighbours, Worcestershire, Health and Wrekin, Shropshire, all facing similar types of challenges. So it's a national issue that we need to go through in terms of the challenge we face. But we're up for the challenge, and we're looking at the ways that we can deal with those arrangements. I've got here, you can see these are the key assumptions we're using to drive those our projections next year. And as you can see, some of our inflation pressures are quite significant, driven by the market where we're buying care services, we're paying care home bills. The reality is it's a competitive environment. We have to pay the market rate on those things. Lots of other costs are increasing, so we're experiencing that. And this shows the assumptions we've built in about the level of increase in council tax, the council tax base, how that will increase. This is a summary of the pressures by directorate, so we've broken those down so we can show you where we're going through. There's pay inflation, pay increments. Demand pressures is a significant one, because not only do we have to deal with inflation in prices, we're faced with more and more of our residents needing help. So we have an ageing population. On level is great because people are living longer, so all the work that public health are doing is paying dividends. But clearly, where we're happy to meet care needs, that's a cost of demographics. A bit of energy inflation. We're a member of West Mercia Energy, which are the 4 councils that work together. So they're very good at forward buying energy. So our pressure of energy costs for next year is less than it could have been. But clearly, over the fullness of time, we will start to pick up the impact of the energy costs. There's only so much they can forward buy. So talk about what's been going on behind the scenes, what's been happening from there. So each corporate director with their portfolio holders has been tasked with putting together a savings program to look about how they deal with in-year pressures. Already on your agenda, you'll see that we're forecasting an overspend at the moment for the current year. That is a forecast, and we expect, as you've seen the papers, to pull some of that back to get us into a better position. But they've been tasked to look at those savings plans. They're looking at recurring savings that we delivered for next year and future years. And we'll take one-off savings and recurring. Recurring is obviously better for the council on our budget. And transformation programs about looking how we do things differently. And they'll be subject to the normal decision-making processes through cabinet and scrutiny back through this committee as we get closer to the budget. But the reality is it's identifying those savings on there We've got to assume the worst now. I hope government is able to help support us, and we'll get more money in the settlement than we are expecting. But at this point, the prudent thing to do is to plan for the worst if there is, and that's what we're doing on there in terms of looking at the significance. The expectation is that we won't get the settlement till very late. Whether there's another budget from government, because there's speculation in the press at the moment, whether that's going to happen next month or not, we'll wait and see. Whether that will have details about local government settlement or help for things like inflation and increased cost of care. And so there's a lot of lobbying that we've all seen in the meeting where councils are making politicians aware in Westminster of the challenge we will face to know that we're prudent, we're planning for the worst and for the best. Just a bit about some of the transformation programs that are coming through. So it's looking about how we transform arrangements in terms of digital customer experience, but we can improve those kind of things through. You may not have this version assigned out as well. This was on an earlier draft, so apologies for that one. I think that was my last slide, wasn't it? Okay. Yeah, if I stop there, I think the next slide.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for that. So what I propose, we have quite a large pack for the budget. So what I propose is we now focus on Appendix 2 and Appendix 3 of our report pack. So Appendix 2 is the Q4 Budget and Performance Report, and Appendix 3 is the Q1 Budget and Performance Report. And I would like to encourage comments, questions and discussions on those two appendices first. So I think it's very important that we look at where cabinets have got to in terms of budget and performance. We fully understand those budget and performance reports, and then we'll conclude on that and then move back to the main body of Mr. Loughborough's report and look at matters going forwards. I guess in terms of focusing on Appendix 2 and 3, I'd probably like to just kick off, and I think this is where we may need perhaps some officer support. I think maybe certainly me, maybe many people in this room find these budget reports to be particularly overwhelming and very detailed and very difficult to get through. And I guess what I'm struggling with is understanding what is statutory spend and what isn't statutory spend. How does the budget spend align with the delivery plan and the corporate objectives? And we have a series of performance measures that accompany the budget. How do they, I guess, trying to understand how they're all interrelated. And, you know, if one of our primary reasons as a scrutiny committee is really to hold cabinet account to what they're doing and what they're achieving, I'm really struggling to understand how they all link together, and by using this information, you know, execute our duties in the best possible manner. So I guess Mr. Loughborough, as our CFO and Section 151 officer, I was just hoping that you perhaps could help us and give us a bit of an explanation about how they all join together and whether that's something that we can achieve out of this paper pack, please.
Thank you, Chair. I ask quite often about what are statutory services and how we do those. The reality is everything the council does is driven by statute. And the days of the council doing things above and beyond what is legally required to do are pretty much behind us now. So every activity we do, I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you will find legislation explaining the services we have to provide. What is down to the council's discretion is how we provide those services. So we have to provide library service, trading standards, environmental health, and so on and so forth. So just about everything that the council does today is driven by that type of legislation. What we have discretion on is how we do that. So what we don't have is a mechanism to say that statutory we have to provide trading standards and it will cost X pound. We have choices as a council how we configure that and operate that service along with all the other statutory services. So I agree that that's not the answer you're expecting, I suspect, but the reality that is how the council operates on that. So to ask a question about how much we spent on training centres, libraries, all of the services, well, it's in the report, whether it should have been a bigger or smaller amount. I don't think I can answer. That's probably a question you need for the revenue portfolio holder to answer that, explain themselves.
And I'm just conscious that I think this is the first time that budget papers have come to a scrutiny committee, probably I think since 2008. So I think it's a very long period of time where we've looked at the performance against budget in a scrutiny committee. And so I can almost guarantee you we're not going to get it right today. And I think this is the first step to try and understand it better, grow in our own knowledge, and then hopefully when we start looking at future quarter reports, we will be in a better position to ask some more questions. But can I ask perhaps members if we can ask for Councillor Norman first, please?
Right, is that on?
No. Yes.
No? Okay, thank you very much. Mine's a fairly general question, but I think it's very important. I wonder if we can get some feedback on how far we're able to look at things like investor save, and also how far, particularly across the different directorates, we're able to consider the sort of activities that actually, again, it is investor save, but it's sort of in a slightly more complex way. For example, if we are taking measures to encourage people to walk instead of getting in their cars, there are a range of services and benefits to the environment, but also to health. Are we able to sort of look at that rather broad brush approach? And if we are, it'd be quite nice to get one or two examples. I think we can all sort of think of those sort of examples ourselves, but I'm not sure how far, when we're looking at this spending and how we share out what we've got, if you like, we're able to do that and take into account those sort of savings. Particularly, I mean, health is a difficult one because health isn't sort of directly within our remit, but we work very closely with the NHS, and of course public health is very closely aligned to what we do. That may be rather complex, but I'd be interested to know how we are able to address it. Thank you.
Is that an appropriate question perhaps to be posed to the cabinet member first and then support by the officer? So I'm not quite sure. Councillor Harvey?
Yes, I'll have a go at that one. Thank you for the question. And yes, we can do invest to save, and it happens in different ways. I'd use the example of the council's digital strategy and investment programme as an invest to save in changing the way that some services are accessed and delivered to the public, and investing in the website, making it more user friendly, enabling residents to be able to see the range of services that they themselves personally and their families are interested in, basically to put themselves at the centre of a view of what the council does and delivers that's relevant to them. That's all part of the website project, but there's also work going on to change the way that services are delivered, using more digital features and some of the things, the cleverness in our mobile phones, and being able to gear off that in terms of how information is presented, using apps and various other techniques. Managing pressures is another way in which we invest to save. I mean, you could look at the whole Talk Community initiative as a way of investing in building capability in our communities to act locally, and to respond locally to very local needs and concerns, and by enabling community initiatives, Talk Community hubs and that sort of thing, we're actually helping to reduce the number of people who end up needing to turn to the council for services. where they can actually access the support and advice and information that they're looking for in their local communities. So those would be a couple of examples, but we do have lots more.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, I'm pleased that we're doing that, and I'm sure there are lots more, but that's a really good start. Thank you very much.
I think we next have Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. Can I just ask a very silly question? It's around your slide on the impact on inflation. And one of our roles is looking at where it fits with the corporate plan. But when you look actually at the diagram of expenditure within the corporate plan, the figures are different. And it's not using the same kind of I suppose, picture to actually demonstrate. So in the corporate plan, it's got 27% for council tax income and 8% for business rates, just mean about where our money comes from. And I'm just wondering, is that I don't understand why 68% comes from of the base budget is funded from council tax. Do you know what I mean? It just seems a huge amount compared to, well, what we started with when I look at the corporate plan picture. Could you, county plan, I mean, could you explain it to me, please?
Yes, John, I'm very happy to do that.
And sorry, can you also, I think, the difference between base and gross budget, whether that has implications, that would be great.
And that is the reason. So between a net and a gross budget on that. So when we set, or when the council sets a council tax, we have to have a net budget. So the papers you saw in February will have the net budget, but actually the gross figure is much higher than that because we passport through a very large grant to the maintained schools, for example, just over 100 million. Straight through our bank account, straight to them. So when you look at the figures in the county plan at that gross level, you get a different percentage because it's just a different calculation. So the figures in your slide are based on the net budget, on the basis that we have no input or influence over the grant to the maintained school arrangement. It is part of our gross, so if we were Marks and Spencer's, it will be part of our turnover, but it comes into our bank account and goes straight back out. We don't take any money from there. Years ago, councils were allowed to top slice the grants to education, but that's long since stopped. So it's a different basis for the calculation. But I'm quite happy to, as a follow-up as written response, I'll show you the two calculations side by side with the diagram so that there's no confusion.
Oh, that would be very useful. Thanks. Yeah, I think it would help members of the public if they're.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
And I just have one question, then before we go on to Louis. Looking at the detailed budget papers, and I was looking at the performance measures, and I see in Q1 many of the performance measures are being grayed out, and in Q4 I think almost all the ambitions have targets that still are in development. So I guess from a scrutiny perspective, just an understanding of why there are no very limited performance measures in our Q1 report, and how can we assess the performance and health of the council at the moment, or sort of ask, and I don't know if this is a question for Liz, if that information is not there. So, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it? It's not what I want to see there either. We have had, we've lost some members of staff who were responsible for developing the performance measures with service delivery areas, and that has had an impact on us being able to agree performance measures for specific service areas to do with a number of those. We do have an interim performance director who's been appointed, Appy Reddy, and she is working very closely with the service areas to address those grey boxes and make sure that we've got performance measures in there. We do have a number of performance measures also which are only sort of sampled annually, so it's not really easy for us to be able to supply those quarterly, and that's simply because of the way the information is collated by outside bodies. You know, when it's to do with things like accidents on the road and those sorts of things, we get that information when we get it, and it doesn't necessarily fit with our quarterly reporting cycle. So that's a bit of a complication, but we have had, we are working to plug those grey gaps. And, you know, I certainly want to see the performance indicators in there, which are giving us a much more fine-grained detail on how we're doing, so that we can make fine adjustments. And that's just not there for us at the moment. It's not ideal, but that's where we are.
And I guess that sort of leads to a much, I guess, bigger picture, Councillor Harvey's, in terms of lack of staff to deliver the performance measures. When I go through the report, I've highlighted in green. Unfortunately, you're online, so you can't see how green my report is. But everywhere where we've either had an underspend or we haven't been able to deliver services because we haven't had the resources or we've had vacancies, it seems to be quite prevalent both throughout the Q4 and Q1 report. So is there any way we can get a better understanding in terms of the underspends due to these vacancies, or what level of service hasn't resulted because of these level of vacancies? Because vacancies and I mean, all the staff performance measures are one of the things that are missing in the performance measures.
Yes. Well, it is an issue across the council, but it isn't just the council. I think all businesses are finding it quite a challenging recruitment and employment environment at the moment. And councillors who've been taking an interest in the difficulties of children's services will know that for a number of years we have been needing to have a large number of agency social workers. Difficult to recruit into Herefordshire. It's not just us, it's also the health service. It's difficult to get GPs. It's difficult to, you know, get all sorts of experienced members of staff to do the kind of work that we're doing. We've got, if you're sort of signed up to social media posts for the council, you'll see regular social media posts saying that we're recruiting and advertising the vacancies that we've got in various areas. But it's, you know, it's a seller's market out there at the moment. And, you know, we're competing against private business for many of the professional services that we're looking to recruit into. And local government is not, you know, in a strong position when it comes to wages in the same way that the private sector is.
So are you aware, Councillor Harvey, are you able to share with us sort of what percentage of permanent staff we have at the moment, or what levels of vacancies we may have?
No, I'm afraid I'm not. I haven't got that information at my fingertip, but if the committee would like it, we can probably provide that information. Of course, one of the things that we're facing in terms of looking to find in-year savings to address the significant inflationary pressures that we're looking at is not necessarily recruiting into vacancies, and that's a consequence of the financial pressures that we've got, and we're asking service areas to provide business cases for the vacancies that they're wanting to fill, to make sure that we can justify those vacancies being filled, and that's again part of normal business, but it is creating some local difficulties, particularly in areas where there's been a significant brain drain.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'd like to now move to Councillor Stark.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And we may look as if we're acting as a team, because my first question which is to do with in-year pressures, Councillor Harvey, page 47 of the pack, which is Appendix 3. And it's this 9.4 million that you're predicting as an in-year pressure on revenue. Could you tell me how much of that will be covered by earmarked reserves and how much will actually need to be found by savings time? That's my first point.
I think Councillor Harvey, you're on mute, we can't hear you.
Sorry, could I have the page reference again, Councillor
Yes,
Stark?
page 47 of the pack, which is Appendix 3. It's page 47 in my pack.
Okay.
And there's a table there where it's showing an in-year pressure on revenue of 9.4 million.
Okay.
And I just want to
Well,
know-
if you scroll back to the previous page, page 46, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mr. Lovegrove, but you can see against the Children's Directorate line, there's 6.27 million that's in brackets there in the second to last column. When the Cabinet received a report in March this year, when Children's Directorate completed their improvement plan, their 3-year improvement plan. They came to Cabinet and said they needed an additional, I think it was £11.4 million in this financial year, over and above, I think it was the extra 4 or 5 million that had been budgeted for and agreed as part of the budgeting process only about 4 weeks previous to that. And we decided as Cabinet that we didn't want to release that money all at once. It was going to have to come from reserves. And we didn't want to release that money all at once. What we wanted to do was to release an initial tranche, recognising that some of the way that money would be spent would be committing it beyond the end of the spending term for that first tranche of money. So it was actually extending commitment into an unfunded area of the year, but saying that we wanted to have a progress update before we released I think it's about 6.4 or 6.5 million, which is the remaining funding. And because that funding hasn't yet been released, we are expecting that to come from reserves, and that 6.4 million is actually part of the 9.4, which is being shown as an overspend at the moment because it hasn't actually been approved for release. I just want to check with Mr. Lovegrove that is correct in how I've explained things. Obviously we were expecting to get that progress report come to Cabinet in July, but the Ofsted inspection has delayed that report coming, obviously, because it was urgent that we responded to the serious concerns that were raised by that inspection, and we are expecting that progress report to come to Cabinet in the autumn, when those reserve funds will need to be released against what will be, I'm expecting, quite a different looking plan, because it will be needing to address urgently the concerns raised by Ofsted, as well as the longer term improvement plan actions that were already in train.
Chair, just before Andrew comes back, does that mean, Councillor Harvey, that the in-year pressure on savings is around 4 million?
Well, it's not, yes-ish, and that's what the other column is, which is showing where the various in-year savings actions are needing to be taken in the directorates in order to bring them back on track.
Okay, if I can continue, Chair, I mean, I'm pleased to see that most of the savings identified this year have been found. But as you know, Councillor Harvey, we have a very checkered history in this council for posting savings that are not necessarily realised. I'd like to ask you as executive member, if we've got to find 4 million savings, how are you going to assure us that those savings that will be posted in year will be robust and deliverable from the executive's point of view?
Well, the as you saw in the slides, the directors are in the process of developing those in-year savings plans alongside looking at the savings that will need to be offered up in order to close the £20 million gap that we're facing for the 2023-24 budget. And the reason why that has to be done together is because there's no point planning for a service to go on now that we're going to have to take a major saving out of later. How we actually do that needs to be reflected in how we act now in this financial year, as well as what we plan to happen next year. And of course, savings are very difficult to deliver straight away unless it's simply cutting jobs. Lots of things that the council does needs to be done in a much more managed way. So savings can't be instantly realised, and we're certainly not looking to cut jobs, although that service cuts may ultimately mean that that's something that's inevitable. But those savings plans for in year are needing to be developed alongside the budget for next year, and we will have to test them as cabinet, and you will need to poke a stick at them from the scrutiny point of view. But they're not in front of me at the moment. The meetings are being held with directors. They're in the diaries during October, and that process has been ongoing since in the officer leadership team since August, I believe. The discussions have been underway.
So let's stay with that, sorry, Chair. I just need to pin this down because we are here to scrutinise the executive, not necessarily officers. How is the executive going to work through these savings as they come to you in order to assure yourselves that the savings will be realised? Because as you say, it's not just 4 million this year. At the moment, it's 21 million next year. And the cumulative effect could be 56 million by 26-27. Now, I know that's not necessarily down to the council's decisions that have been taken. There's a lot of external factors, but I'm trying to get at how you as executive are going to work through the rest of this year to ensure that whatever savings come to you, that you're going to be able to test them and assure yourselves that they are robust and deliverable.
Well, that is the discussion process that goes on in cabinet and between cabinet members and their lead officers. We ask for evidence and assurance that the savings are achievable, and officers, describe to us what the actions are that will be taken in order for those savings to be realised. And we rely on our officers to understand in detail the nuts and bolts of how their services are delivered, what their overheads and operating costs are, what their staff costs are, and what their sort of bought in services and supply chain costs are, and in making savings where the savings are going to be realised. And it's that detailed work that goes on between the service areas and also tested by Mr. Lovegrove's team of accountants who work out in the directorates and with the directorates in supporting them on finance matters, where that detail is actually brought together, tested, assessed, and checked. But inevitably, savings that are anticipated sometimes don't come to fruition for one reason or another.
Chair, I don't know how you're going to handle the meeting today. I certainly see a recommendation from us along those lines that we need to be assured that in the in-year pressures, which are going to be covered by savings, that those savings are robust and deliverable. I would certainly have a recommendation from this board today, because we are getting it on in the year, and we could end up at the end of this year with quite a difficult financial position. So I don't know how you're dealing with it, whether you want to have recommendations today, but that would be one of my recommendations.
Okay, we can. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor Stout. We'll note that, and then as we draw the conclusion to this part of the discussion, we can agree.
I've got other questions, but I'll leave the floor to others if they want.
Yeah, I have a few hands up, if that's okay.
Okay,
So I have Jonathan, Lester, next please, Councillor Lester.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just a question for Mr. Lovegrove with regard to the slide presentation. It's the slide presentation that starts with impact of inflation, which is page 27 of these papers. So my question is, it says that the assumption is that there will be a 2.99% increase in council tax. Whose assumption is that, and why have they assumed it?
That's hopefully an officer assumption, so I guess it's myself on that. It's 1.99 increase for general council tax and 1% for an adult social care precept announced. In the absence of guidance from government, we've just followed in effect what we've seen previously from government. So I fully accept it is an assumption. It's one made by officers rather than the executive. We start the conversation and start the budget process. That's what we've used. I don't know what government will do in terms of the amount we can raise, you can raise as council on council tax, and what the council would choose for. But to start the calculation off, that's what we've our working assumption, and that's aligned with what most other councils in England are also assuming.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Fagan.
Yeah, thank you. And my question really is about the use of reserves in the capital budget, and just looking at sort of page 37 primarily. So, and apologies if this information is in the report, there's quite a lot to take in. But given that many projects that keep Herefordshire moving forward are grant funded, and these require a degree of match funding, just, you know, obviously this is going to come from the reserves, and I'm just wondering if any amount has actually been allocated to ensure that these projects continue. So is that the, you know, the 56 million sort of that's in the column 2021-22 carrying over, and sort of do we have any indication of what projects are in the pipeline that would need match funding sort of in the next financial year, so what we would require to put forward to actually sort of see these through. So that's the one question, and I've just got another one after that. Thanks.
Rather technical question, so I'm not quite sure if Councillor Harvey, you're able to answer that, or if you'd like to refer it to Mr. Lovegrove.
If I can just sort of add that, you know, this is one of the things that sort of outward facing really important for Herefordshire, but also that the public look at and go, well, why are we wasting money on this when actually, you know, potentially we've got a 2.99% increase in council tax, there's a cost of living crisis. So it's really sort of looking, can we look ahead to those to be able to sort of justify the use of reserves in that way?
Councillor Harvey?
Well, the capital programme forms part of the budget, and that shows across a number of years how money is planned to be spent into the future, and how that money is going to be delivered in terms of cash reserves, grants, funding from other sources, and the Cabinet has just, I think last week, had a review of the reserves and looked at where some of the reserves were to be allocated to delivering some projects that are important for the delivery plan and for the county plan, to make sure those continue to get taken forward. And that was part of the Cabinet debate. I think it was last week, or maybe the week before. So I was off ill at the time, but I think it was a fortnight ago now. So those reserves and their use are under review. Sometimes we don't know when grant funding is actually going to come forward. We anticipate it based on the kind of statements that get made by government about what its priorities are and where it's intending to place funding. But their timescales don't always run to plan. At the moment, we're waiting for decisions on things like the Levelling Up Fund. We've just recently heard about the Stronger Towns money, which did need to have matched funding from the council. So some of our reserves have been used in order to match with that government money in order to secure significant investments. That fund was constrained in terms of what it could be spent on and could only be spent in the city. But we have in the capital programme allocated funds for investments in the market towns and in schools building programmes and those sorts of things. So we are using our reserves by balancing out what we consider to be the priorities at the time. It will be great to do more, but when we can't do as much as we want to do, we have to decide what are the most urgent investments that need to be made, and those are aligned with the objectives in the county plan and then more detailed in the delivery plan, which details how that county plan's going to be delivered over the next 12 months.
And I think Mr. Lovegrove had a point, and then I think Councillor Stark and Councillor Fagan had a specific point on this as well. And then we'll move to you, Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I think at the beginning of Councillor Fagan's question was a question about how much of the earmarked reserve is going to be used for capital. Well, earmarked reserves are revenue reserves. We can keep revenue and capital money separate, so there's no intention to use earmarked revenue reserves to fund capital projects. I just want to make that point clear. It's quite a technical area, as we will recognise the rules around what you can use revenue money for and what capital, so they are completely separate.
And if it's on the same point,
It's on
Councillor
capital, the capital budget. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harvey, while we're on the capital budget, and we have talked about the amount of projects that have been held over, if you go to page 14 in the Appendix 3, you will see in paragraph 11 that we've got an underspend of 69.5 million against a budget of 133.8 million. With inflation going through the roof, with construction tender index going through the roof, the more we delay projects at this crucial time, the more likely they're not going to be delivered, because many of them will have overspends because of the inflationary pressures. And I accept that you're not going to use reserves necessarily to try and help with these projects in order to actually perhaps recruit staff to make them happen. But 69.5 million against a budget of 133.8 million is pretty massive, Councillor Harvey. And it's going to give us headaches when it comes to trying to re-tender for these if they're going to be affected by the inflation. Can you comment, please?
Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Harvey.
Sorry. You're quite right. the costs are only going up. A lot of our delays are not because we're, dragging our heels on things. It's, partly legacy from COVID. It's partly difficulty getting raw materials. It's partly getting design work and, professional services delivered in order to get the projects progressing. Everything seems to be taking a lot longer, partly because of the employment situation and those sorts of pressures. And yes, it is putting the price up on everything. So, some of the decisions that we're having to take are whether we can do the same for less, whether we can shave our ambition, if you like, in terms of what we actually achieve and make that do, or whether there are some projects which we have to review and consider whether they need to be delivered in a different way as a consequence of those sorts of cost pressures and the delays to do with the delivery systems.
And just on the resourcing point, Councillor Harvey, from what I understand, we have invested considerably in a project management team, primarily to help move some of these projects forwards. But we're just not seeing, it doesn't appear, we've got the cost of the project management team, but we're still seeing significant delays similar to prior years. So can you comment on that?
Well, I think the position is significantly improved. If in financial terms there are underspends, I think that's a function of the size and nature of the projects. The work that's being done by the project management office in supporting service areas or leading on project delivery is having a significant impact in improving our ability to deliver to time and to cost. And we are seeing those underspends in terms of the profiled delivery of the capital programme reducing.
Okay, yeah, because I just wanted to ask you where, you're saying that it's delivering significant benefits, but at the moment I see quite a lot of capital projects being delayed. I see 78 out of 83% of projects, having underspend, which from a trend perspective, it looks like things just are not progressing. So you say that you're identifying some real benefits, but where within the budget can we actually see that? Because at the moment I'm only seeing I'm not seeing them.
Well, sometimes underspends are the benefit, that actually, some of our projects are delivering under budget. So they're costing less than originally anticipated, and that underspend is reflected in the underspend column because it's being compared to the budget, the original budget.
I think Councillor Stark may have a couple of examples.
That's a problem, Councillor Harvey. Looking at these figures, we cannot see the impact in terms of what the benefits is of the project management investment in the 69.5 million underspend. Forgive us, but when I look at a figure like that, I think, wow, it's because projects are not being delivered. So perhaps that's another recommendation, Chair, is that 69.5 million or whatever it might be is actually split into underspends because projects are delayed and underspends where there have been direct benefits from more expert project management input. I think that would be one of the recommendations I would make, because I can't see that in these figures. And apologies to Councillor Summers, but I just thought it was an add-on from Councillor.
A lot of apologies. Sorry. Yeah, I put my hand up right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Councillor Summers, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. number one, but just to go back on the questions that are going on right now, capital, oh, first of all, good to see you back, Councillor Harvey, and I hope you're feeling better.
Getting there.
The capital projects, now, I'm just a meat and potatoes guy, and lumber has increased by threefold in the past month, so overly doubled in the past 12 months. So there are a lot more costs involved with everything. And quite frankly, with the way interest rates are going up, I'd rather see that money put into a safety place and get some interest on it. That's just my feelings. I would like, at least for the public's and my sake, a list of statutory, what we have to pay statutory, if you wouldn't mind. So there's some things we have to pay for, we have no choice. There's other things, it's a choice. So we need to have that broken down, I think, to start with. That's just something for you to work on for me. Now, in my previous life, performance and ROI was my biggest bugbear, and I lived with that for quite a number of years. So I have a couple of questions on performance, and I think that's what for me is lacking. Performance levels. Now, performance, for example, on barrel bikes, we're putting another 125,000 in. I'd like to see the performance of those barrel bikes over the past 12 months. They've been in place for almost 2 years. Where are they mostly being used as a way of moving them around? But instead of putting 125,000 out extra, let's find out how they're being used. It should be coming now into self-sufficiency as far as I can see. I can't see us putting more money into it. Debt write-off. I'm not sure how, if you use a company for debt write-off, are we trying to do it in-house or do we put it in the hands of a company? That would be interesting to find what there's 351,000 in debt write-off. So there's a few things that we need to see the performance and how we're performing. If we don't have that, then we can't make a decision on what to do in the future. If what we've done, I don't want to go right through the past. It'll take care of itself. But there are some things, if we have the performance of that, then we can have some idea of what we want to do in the future. That's just me. Thank you very much for listening to me. It went off. Okay.
And I think performance measures is something that we have raised as a real issue. The fact that we there are very few performance measures in the Q1 reports. And many of the some of the performance measures, as Councillor Harvey referred to, they can only measure at certain times of the year. So the Q4 report has a number of gaps as well. So it's a question maybe around have we got well, we're being told we don't have the resources at the moment in order to deliver those performance reports, but is that good enough? Should we really? I mean, we can't scrutinise. And how can we manage if we don't have the performance report? So I think that certainly there certainly needs to be some sort of communication. I think from this scrutiny committee.
I do have trouble with that, Chair. We don't have the resources for that. You would think, or I would think, when I'm in business, I know everything all the way along the line what's happening with that particular project. If I'm producing a garment, for example, I know all the way along what stores it went into, et cetera, et cetera. We should know that without putting extra money into it. It should be a normal, everyday way of doing business. And we are a business at the end of the day. We need to make sure we know where our money is being spent, how it's being spent. If we don't know that, we can't form budgets. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so I think I have Councillor Swinglehurst and then Councillor Fagan. Councillor Harvey. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey, you have your hand up, so I missed that.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you wanted me to give any response to Councillor Summers' questions.
Yes, we've got. Yes, if you can give us a short response, that would be great.
Okay, well, we have got the resources in place now to support the development of performance measures. We did have a gap in staffing for several months, but that's been filled now, so that work is underway, and I'd be expecting those performance measure gaps to get plugged pretty swiftly. So I'm hoping that position will recover.
So Councillor Harvey, that should be a commitment that the Q2 reports that we should be receiving at our next committee meeting should have performance measures in them.
They will have improved performance measures. I think the interim performance director has been spending a lot of time in children's. So some of her time spent on the more general performance measures has been redirected to provide support into children's since the summer. So we won't be as far forward at Q2 as I would have hoped, but there's some intensive work obviously that's been going on in the Children's Directorate. I would be expecting by Q3 that we'd be much closer to being on track. As far as statutory services are concerned, I think Mr. Lovegrove said that there's hardly anything that we do now that doesn't have some basis in law for why we're doing it. How we do it, we may need to look at changing, and that's part of what we're going through as a process in looking to find all these savings. Debt write-off, we had a decision recently that was published on how we do our commission our debt recovery, and I know our debt management team worked really hard to try and minimise the level of debt recovery of debt write-off that we end up with, and I think it is a very small percentage in terms of the total amount of funding that we deal with. On barrel bikes, there has been an increase in the cost of energy associated with running the scheme. There's also been an extension of the scheme in terms of introducing the electric bikes and also cargo bikes, and I think some of that is actually part of the 125k that you see there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'm just conscious of time. We do want to spend some time on this and also on the other elements of the budget. So if I can ask members perhaps to ask if they've got some key questions, if you can get your name in the list so we can have everyone maybe at least one more time, and then we'll so then we can also move on.
Should we not have a recommendation on performance measures, Chair? I think Councillor Summers made a very important point. We shouldn't lose sight of that. We should actually specifically ask for better performance measures going forward.
Okay, we can note something and then agree some wording towards the end. So I think we have Alyssa, Councillor Swinglehurst, and then Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Dr. Chair, and very nice to see you back, Councillor Harvey. I'm glad you're doing that. Yeah, I'm going to pick up this point of performance measures and KPIs, whether we've got the right KPIs, and just having more KPIs is not necessarily better. We just need the right ones. And for me, it's all about telling a story, linking it to the county plan, your objectives, and how far, whether the budget set aside, been spent, has it achieved the objectives, not simply a matter. So if you take, for example, it's only because this is sort of in my head, the wetlands. The money has gone into that project and it's delivering wetlands. Delivering a wetland is not actually the objective of the project. The objective of the project is to reduce phosphate and to deliver the housing. So the final outcome of the KPI has to be what is the actual outcome, whether it's carbon reduction or it's, where is it in the county plan? And it's that kind of narrative that would help me understand whether the budget is being spent in a way that is delivering on the plan that we're here to deliver. If that's helpful, if we're going to come up with anything on KPIs, and it's sort of, coming up with something that isn't just a dry statistical analysis, but it tells a story that we can all understand, that the public understand as well. And I think that's important. And I'm going to pick up a little bit as well on the capital programme, and again, it's sort of trying to get a narrative around it. So I've been looking at the budget with, bearing in mind that I'm chair of the Healthcare and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee, so I've been trying to look at it through that lens, and the delivery of the strategic housing and development budget. It just it doesn't appear to be delivered. Total housing, there's a huge variance, and the other thing being technology-enabled communities, which might then have a knock-on effect on the way the adults' wellbeing budget is delivered, because they're relying on an increase of technology-enabled living. So whether that all joins up in a way that that gives us an informed total picture of capital spend impacting revenue spend in a particular department. So I'm very interested in comments on that. And then finally, picking up a little bit on the point that Councillor Stark was making about the robustness of savings, that you've got on Q4 paragraph 4, decreasing care packages with home care, but we also have an increase in demand, and only 53% of annual reviews having been completed. So there's a kind of, in my mind, that's a bit of there's a sort of mysterious element to the what the demand might ultimately be once the care package reviews have been undertaken, and whether or not we have confidence, as Councillor Stark says, is that does the administration have confidence in these figures, or does there need to be an acknowledgement of that there's a certain amount of known unknown in there, which again, looking to the slightly further ahead with the MTFS, excluding the fair cost of care policy, which I know is a little bit murky, but nevertheless, it would have an impact. So I believe we are doing work on that. So those numbers should be out there, and shouldn't we be having those in the budget somewhere, as opposed to another known unknown? Because we need to have confidence in these figures as far as is practicable, given that we know there's a lot of complexity around this and external pressures, which I think we all acknowledge. So I'll leave it. Maybe perhaps whoever wants to come back on that.
Thank you, Councillor Kinghurst. Councillor Harvey, I think your councillors from Kinghurst, your points around the performance measures, I think, have been noted. So that's, I think, really valuable. Councillor Harvey, would you like to comment on the other points that Councillor Kinghurst raised, please?
Well, in terms of getting the measures right, yes, absolutely. I think sometimes the overall objective is such a long way off that we'd all be waiting a very long time to actually see the phosphates in the rivers drop, and that there are a number of, using your example, and that maybe it's important that we identify what the plan is in terms of helping to realise that improvement in river condition, and that there are a number of things that need to be delivered as milestones along the way, one of which is actually getting the wetlands in place and operating, as well as having a trading system for those phosphate credits, which is credible and is measurable and backed by science, etc. So what I'm also keen to do is not to have measures that are so far in the future in order to be able to take them, that we travel through a long period of time where we haven't got any inputs whatsoever, which are saying we're actually making progress towards this goal. So I absolutely take your point. The wetlands are part of a journey, which is a long one, and it's a step along the way, but I think it's worth recognising when that step has been taken, and then understanding what the next thing is that needs to be focused on, and that's why delivery plans generally are only a year long, and why the county plan is 4 years, so that you can actually make those changes and recognise those milestones being delivered and moving on to the next step on the journey. You talk about fair cost of care. The adult social care team have been doing a lot of work with care providers to actually sample what the local care costs are in our local market as part of a national call for data from government on that. And those figures are being submitted to government now, who will then weigh them, dice them, slice them, and come back with some sort of a judgment. I think the word fair is being removed from by government from the overall study. So because I think fair means different things to different people. People actually paying those costs. Is it fair for the providers? Is it fair for local government who's needing to purchase on behalf of others? So I think fair's being removed, and they're just looking generally at the cost of care. And when we've got the information back from government on that, we will, you know, we will factor it into our work. In the meantime, our officers are very familiar with the local market and with the prices at which we have to purchase care locally. We are a minority purchaser of adult social care, and we have a big self-funder market in Herefordshire, so we don't necessarily dictate the market price. We have to respond and reflect it, and that's what we do every day in purchasing care packages and supporting families who are contributing to care costs themselves.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor?
So I'm going to come back briefly on that, if I may, Councillor Harvey, that if we again go back to the example of the wetlands, I think I'm not really suggesting that the outcome is a reduction of phosphate in the River Wye, but that there is a measurable amount of phosphate that is going in one end of the wetland, and there'll be a different amount going out the other end, and that's the difference. And so that's a measurable outcome as soon as the wetland is up and functioning as it should be. So it shouldn't be like lost in the forever. Although I do take your point, but wherever possible, if we could tie it back to a kind of a practical outcome as opposed to the delivery of a project which actually has a secondary purpose. The other purpose obviously being freeing of housing from the so-called moratorium. So as soon as housing starts to get built, that's an outcome. And again, that's not, I don't think, somewhere lost in the future. It's a deliverable thing. At that point, you can say, right, that project absolutely delivered. So that was what I was trying to get to. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. I have Councillor Fagan next.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just try and be quick. And mine was also about the housing moratorium in the north. And I wondered do we have figures about the impact of that on the council's finances? Because we know, you know, we know what social care and what children's the sort of pressures of those they're putting on the budget, but do we actually know the financial cost of the housing moratorium on the council? And if we do, is it, you know, given the evidence, I know it's a long journey, but is it possible that we can make the journey shorter if it's actually going to put the council in a stronger position to meet the financial pressures that are sort of coming towards us? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Harvey?
Well, the impact of the moratorium on the River Lug catchment is not just on the council. It's multifaceted. It's affecting our economy much more widely than just whether or not we get council tax from new houses that are built. That's you know, a fractional consideration in the overall scheme of things. So obviously the council's working with partners and external agencies to do what we can on this. There is we have an annual housing delivery report which is produced, which also contributes to identifying what our 5-year housing land supply is. And in terms of housing delivered across the county, our numbers are holding up. So yes, we have a significant area which is constrained in terms of the way in which housing comes forward, but there have still been a lot of planning applications that have been approved with appropriate water treatment facilities associated with them, even within the moratorium area. It's not that there is a complete blanket ban on all forms of development. There have been a lot of planning applications that have been approved within the area using packet treatment plants and other ways to manage wastewater. So development is still going ahead in that area, but it's going ahead in a much more tightly managed manner.
Are you comfortable with that response, Councillor Fagan?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel that given the situation, we talk about lobbying government, that we should actually be sort of lobbying stronger to make sure that we can sort of get those businesses, kickstart those businesses again, and take the pressure off the Herefordshire's economy through that. But thank you, I appreciate what you've said.
Thank you. We now have Councillor Watson.
Hi, thank you. I'm not quite sure who's going to be able to answer my question, because I want to pick up something that Councillor Swinglehurst started talking about, was the focus on social care pathways. And I note within the Q1 budget and performance report dated Thursday, the 29th of September, on page 45, is around domiciliary care. But I'm actually concerned about some opportunity costs here, because we talked on Mr. Lovegrove's presentation, we talk about additional support. Without additional support, we're going to be, it's going to be affecting frontline service delivery. And then on the other part of his presentation around digital and customer transformation program is I note, and sorry about this, I've got various pieces of paper in front of me. I note within the Q4 2021 risk assessment on CO5 that the use of technology to support home care and extend independent living, it didn't actually meet its target. It was actually red. So, and it talks about this equates to less than 30 admissions, but remains course for focus with developments and plans to address the relatively high rate of younger people admitted to care homes. I thought that's fascinating, because as anyone under 65 classed as a younger person, and my questions are also talking about talk community hubs, because domiciliary care, according to my Google search, is you're receiving care in your own home, help with shopping and medical support. But we've also got the talk community hubs, which do a huge amount of work in the service, and we've also got neighbourhood schemes. And how much is actually delivered of those domiciliary services are actually delivered by community at no cost to the council? So it's like an opportunity cost that we don't seem to have. And it would be really good, since we can have a better insight around talk community hubs, what, are they having an impact, or are volunteers, how much is being delivered by volunteers around domiciliary care? And also about the impact, and I don't know if it should be a briefing paper or a members briefing actually focusing on the adult social care pathway, because I found in that report in Appendix 3, page 51, that the brokerage team, which I'm assuming is the collaboration between the NHS and local authority, is currently seeing about 3 times the number of placement requests. We know that we've got a rising ageing population in Herefordshire. We know that we've got a significant number above the national average of unpaid carers, and it's going to be very interesting to see what the statistics are from the census data of 2021. And it's a shame that we don't get information from the DWP on how many actually receive carers allowance in Herefordshire. But for me, this is a perfect storm around social care, and I think adult social care. And I know that Councillor Crockett isn't here today and we haven't invited her, but I would really like to see, because I see that Hoople Care is now a provider as from the 1st of June 22. That's on number 37 on page 51. But when you've got paragraph 36, 37, 38, and you understand, yes, we've been focusing a lot on children's of late, and we've got the River Wye issue and the housing issue, but actually around domiciliary care and self-funders, you know, how many people are actually self-funding, which is at no cost to the council. I just really worry about this part of our budget, and actually what are we not seeing? I don't know if anyone can make sense of what I'm asking, because it's quite complex, but
It was quite lengthy.
lengthy. But I'm going to put it over. I think it's unfair to ask Councillor Harvey because it's not her portfolio, but can anyone comment on that, please?
Or if this is an information request that we've got to perhaps note.
It would be useful to get a conciser definition, precisely what information.
Or perhaps as we finish off the remaining questions on this area, if you can perhaps concisely put together an information request that we can then read out and everyone can agree on. That would be great. So I have Councillor Wilding next. Thank you.
That's the lead chair that Councillor Wilding might have logged himself off.
Logged himself up. Okay, so we'll move on to Councillor Andrews then, please.
Okay, I think I'm quite impressed with this budget report when you read it. I think I read it, it's like, yeah, it reads well, everything's good, it looks nice and settled. But similar to where I was on the 5th September when we came here before, I think I'm still a little bit disappointed in it. So I'm going to explain why, maybe lead to some questions of why I think that is. So I think it reads really flat. I think it reads really standard, as if we've seen it again. It's sort of what we expect to see. Nothing's different. It's a budget that just about any council could have put out and said, that's what you're going. I don't think it really sort of tells Hereford's any different to anywhere else, which I think I'm a little bit disappointed in. I think we deserve better than that, and we're trying to do something different. And I like this idea about KPIs. Like, to be honest, I live in KPIs. I've done for like 30, 40 years. And it's really good. People talk about KPIs. And as soon as we did, we drifted off into wetlands and social care and infrastructure. And that's great. You're talking about it, but that doesn't matter about the budget. The budget KPIs, none of us have even said, when you are not in budget against your scope, what are you doing to now analyse that and react to it to make sure that you bring that back into a red status, from a red status to a green status, sorry, that you say we are now back in budget. I want to know how quickly you can turn around a budget that is failing to be rescued. I want to know how you do that investigation, how quickly you can react to it, and are you really going to be ambitious in timelines that make it work within the quarter or the next quarter? I really am not comfortable with people here nowadays, in a time when you can order something today and get it in your house tomorrow, that we're not going to react to something that's going to take us 3 quarters to say we're losing money this way, and it's going to take us nearly all year to get to a point where we think we might know where that is. Now, if everybody in the room thinks acceptable, then okay, fair enough, perhaps I'm wrong. But people make billions of pounds at saying that's wrong. And the correct way of doing it is to be ambitious and to drive for a success which says it's wrong, and it's still going to be wrong. And how long are you going to accept it to be wrong before you say correct it? And I think that's something that in this room we should sort of be a little bit more ambitious to chase and secure it. So when we talk about KPIs in the budget, what are the KPIs for the budget? What really drives you, Councillor Harvey, to say I am no longer acceptable for this? And I'm going to pull people in front of me to say, where have you got to? How far would you let a budget drift before you say, come and see me?
Councillor Harvey.
Well, I don't let the budget drift, and neither does Mr. Lovegrove. You know, if you had my cabinet colleagues in here with me, they would confirm that, you know, they are just as much on their portfolio area budgets as I am looking at the budget overall. Yes, we produce quarterly performance reports, but we get, you know, I'm agitating Mr. Lovegrove to know what the close of the accounting period figures are looking like at the end of every month, and you know, where his team of finance officers are, you know, working in the directorates on a daily basis with the officers in the service areas, providing day-to-day financial support for the service areas, and also integrating a view of that across all service areas for Mr. Lovegrove and his team in the finance area of corporate. Where we're losing money, as you term it, is quite often in places where we are not making the level of income that we anticipated coming out of COVID. I mean, there are things like our car parks, which are still not delivering the level of income that they were pre-COVID, haven't got, you know, because people's movement habits have changed. They're working in different ways, they're shopping in different ways. You know, lots of people did get into, you know, having their shopping delivered by the supermarket and that sort of thing. And that means they're not going into town while they're at the supermarket for other things and parking in the car parks and spending a bit of money in the shops in the town centres, and everybody's feeling the consequence of that. So, you know, in a lot of places where we're losing money through reduced income. And then, of course, we've got the cost pressures that are indicated because of the additional expenses from not just service costs going up, but also the inflationary pressures that are caused by national and international matters. But I'm not, you know, I don't sit with my feet on the desk for 3 months and then wake up and pay a bit of attention to a quarterly performance report. I'm on it all the time.
Councillor Andrews, you.
No, well, I wouldn't take it personal, Councillor Harvey. You wouldn't say you were having your feet up by a long way. What I will say though is that I would still ask that, with your assurance then, that every budget will be met and everything will be met, and we'll challenge every loss that's a difference on there, which is fantastic. And if that's what everything happens, then I'll be extremely pleased. Bits I will continue to challenge on is, so if you're great, you identified it, we're losing that income. Car park income, I know is significant, but it's not, it shouldn't be the be all and end all of our budget. It's its target or doesn't hit its target. I'm convinced that isn't what you meant, but I would also ask that if we're missing revenue, what is the ambition of the council to go and find new income revenue streams that are coming in, and how are we securing those? What are we looking at? Because in the end, that capital pot will disappear and you'll end up looking at it will be gone. Like everybody's savings, if you do nothing, it'll eventually all be gone. So what are we looking as a council to find out where the new items are? What are we looking to see that we actually secure new income streams coming in that perhaps are different to anybody else, that gives us that cutting edge, that we're on the front foot and we're not a following council. We are actually trying to put something forward and do it. Now, within new project management people that are coming in, you should also get lots of new ideas. So are we grasping those ideas and are we able to bring that into the council here? And how does that work into the financial community of this council?
Those are good questions. Yes, we have acquired experience of new ways of doing things with not only our new directors, but also with the interim senior officers that we're bringing in. And, you know, that's not all filling gaps that we can't recruit into. Some interims are coming in because we need some short-term support in very particular niche areas, and we're buying that expertise in to walk with us for a short period of time. And that's not a permanent appointment because we don't see it as a long-term issue. So it's a bit of mix and match on the interims. It's not all because we can't recruit. In terms of new income, we are looking at where we can generate additional income from new sources, but also we don't we're not necessarily looking to do things that nobody has ever done before. I'm quite a fan of letting other people cut through the jungle and work it out. And if other local authorities have had good ideas, I'm not averse to us pinching those. Once they've ironed all the wrinkles and crinkles out and decided, how to make it work for them, we can then look at whether there's anything special about Herefordshire if we were going to take some of those things on. And I know in the economy and environment area, part of the transformation work that's going on, looking at how we can deliver services differently, and that particular directorate has got a lot of services that are not the social care services, where we are looking to have efficiencies and savings. If there are new ways of delivering those services, or indeed creating income generating traded services on the back of some of the internal expertise that we've got, we're asking our officers to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. I've got just a couple of questions on corporate performance, and then I believe we have Councillor Wilding, who has come back from the ether, hopefully, and then Councillor Lester, and then we might close up on this discussion. So my questions around corporate performance, at page 42 of the pack, Appendix 2, paragraph 42, talks about how Appendix F contains a set of measures of corporate performance which have been selected as an indication of the overall health of the organisation. So the only measures on track, RIDDOR and RIDDOR, excuse me, I don't know what that acronym is, and savings, but staff, capital projects, complaints, planning are all below target. So we're looking at increase in sickness, increase in turnover, and a decrease in overall organisational health. So I guess I've just got, I'd like to invite some comments on that. But then also, if I look at the corporate budget, if I look at quarter 4, 21-22, it looks like we had a 2.6 million variance. And then in the quarter 1 report, it looks like a further 1 million variance. So that's rather significant. I feel like that's rather significant. So if I could invite some comments on that, Councillor Harvey, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
My godfathers, you've nearly blown my brain here, trying to jump around the place and follow what you were saying. So page 42, paragraph 42 is talking about Appendix F.
I guess the key things, Councillor Harvey, is that it says that the overall health of the organisation is not great. We're also seeing in the statistics an increase in sickness, an increase in turnover. So there's that combination coming out of the corporate performance measures. But then secondly, on corporate performance, at the end of quarter 4, 21-22, we had finance corporate services with a 2.6 million overspend, with in the quarter 1 report a further 1 million overspend. So for corporate services, that seems rather significant. So there are two separate things that I wanted you to comment on, please.
Okay, and when you're talking about turnover, you're talking about staff turnover and not financial turnover.
Which turnover am I talking about?
Start use the term turnover.
Yes, I'm talking about staff turnover. Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Okay, yes. Well, like lots of organisations where we've been seeing a lot of churn in our staff, councillors have heard about it and the level of churn in Children's Directorate, particularly seeing as it's a seller's market in terms of social workers being in very high demand, and us not being able to compete on the wages front with some of the other local authorities, and that's the same across the piece. We do have some areas of the council where we have high levels of sickness. I think it's always been high in the adults area, and that's partly because they're dealing with very vulnerable clients, and if people are ill and or they're feeling unwell, they are not going in to see vulnerable clients because they could be taking germs with them. Obviously, COVID's had a big effect there. I think we are also seeing a certain amount of stress in terms of our staff and stress-related sickness. And I know that that's something that that the HR team are looking at. You know, there is some work that's going on looking at levels of sickness, which is and staff turnover, which are, you know, obvious areas as indicators of other things going on. I mean, we are in the process of a massive change program. Staff are under a lot of pressure. It's not just been COVID, it's also been transformation, making big savings, 11.5 last year, and, you know, even more in the year to come. Our staff are stressed and they're tired, you know, and they're getting ill. And you're seeing that amongst councillors as well as our staff. You know, people are, you know, some people are running on empty, and it's really tough, and we need to recognise and reflect that in how we treat people and how we manage them, but we still have, you know, life depending upon services that we have to continue to deliver. So it's a really delicate balancing act that, you know, we're asking our you know, managers and our staff to undertake. So I don't take lightly those staff figures, and, you know, we have got people looking into them, and they do form part of our performance dashboards, so we are keeping an eye on them, but they are in part a symptom of quite what a stressed environment we are operating in. And we can do what we can to protect ourselves and our people from those stresses, but we can't, you know, protect them from them completely.
Thank you. That certainly may have to be a line of inquiry for, I think, our next meeting where we're covering HR. But if you're able to comment on the large variances,
the money variances,
yeah, that would be great.
Well, I think I'm hoping that Mr. Lovegrove will be able to, you know, come in support of this one, but my recollection is that we ended up accounting for some significant costs in corporate where we were making investments that were actually in support of service areas of the council or transformation, and those costs just ended up being collected and accounted for in corporate, where they were actually directly related to service area activities, and you know, that happened in the back end of last financial year, and we're seeing a little bit of it through in this financial year as well. But Mr. Lovegrove, I haven't got the detail mapped away in my brain.
Councillor Harvey is correct that there was an element of those costs being parked in corporate, for want of a better description, and they're being reallocated. And part of that was funding some of the transformation activity that the council is going through.
So can you explain that a little bit more? Because we're talking about 2.6 million, which on your base budget, it's a large variance compared to, I mean, we've got a 4 million variance in children. So can you go into that? Is it staffing? Is it what would it entail?
Well, part of the reason for doing it that way, as Councillor Harvey explained, for the rest of the organisation, we have had some staff turnover in the corporate finance functions, so we've not had the capacity that we were hoping for, so we've had to do some of these arrangements. Some of those costs are relating to staff costs. Some of those are costs that will be recharged to the appropriate directorate, that they will take into the corporate process to get the additional staff on. into the council, and then they'll be recoded appropriately.
Okay, so they're predominantly staff costs, which you intend to recode back out in the financial accounts.
Yes.
And then we're looking at a 1 million overspend already in Q1. So is that a similar?
Which we need to be careful that this is Q1 is a forecast for the end of the year, so it's not an overspend of. I think there were some early questions about why we would do it at the year end. So that's people forecasting at the end. We tend to be a glass half empty type approach to make sure that we're prudent to these arrangements. So I expect that to improve as we go through the year.
Okay, and so the recharging, so would that say predominantly be the project management team that are doing work for other departments, and then you're recharging the cost of that FTE out?
That's the largest element of that, yes.
Okay, so the 2.6 million is predominantly probably your project management team. Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Lester, I believe. Oh no, so Councillor Wilding next, and then Councillor Lester, and then we'll finish up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies, I had to dip out. We just suddenly had 2 guests arrive at our holiday let. I had to let in and show round. And also apologies because I'm a complete dummy and I don't understand figures or anything. In fact, looking at all the figures that we got sent, they just seem to just swim around in my head, and I lose all sense of motion and time. So I can't really pull up any of those figures and make any sense of them to ask a question. I can only go for much more basic questions. So, and I think it was already pointed out by Graham that, you know, he asked, where are the new income streams? It seems to me that that's one of the areas we need to look at. And somebody else said, what's special about Herefordshire? And of course, it is our natural capital. So I think those 2 things go together. We somehow need to leverage our natural capital in greater increasing ways over the next few years to help us in that regard. In terms of saving or making money, I can only think of things like, can we charge more for planning applications? Can we, parking's already been mentioned, and I take what Councillor Harvey said. When we eventually get our new Eastern Crossing, will that be a toll bridge? With Zoom meetings, this meeting, you know, I'm not there, so I've saved the council 20 quid by not driving to this meeting. And this meeting, I think, could be done online, and we would have saved some money, not a huge amount, but times it by all the scrutiny meetings over the year. And I guess it comes to a certain amount. It's our time, our expenses, setting up the equipment and everything else. I recognise that people will say, well, the government say we can't make votes in a meeting if we're online, but the council needs to put more pressure on the government to change that, I think, because you know, it's just madness that we spend money on a meeting that we could easily do online, and it would save officer time as well, which is again money. What else could I think of? I'm sure the Shire Hall isn't part of the budget thinking at the moment, but for my mind, we're going to have to dump doing the Shire Hall, just put a big sign over it saying this building has been sacrificed to save some money. Anyway, there we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilding. And then Jonathan Lester, please. Councillor Lester.
Yes, thank you. A question for Councillor, Mr. Lovegrove, is on page 55, where it's got the list of reserves, earmarked reserves. Right at the bottom, near the bottom, I should say, it says other small reserves. What's that money for, please?
Chair, we will have a large number of quite small reserves that we hold rather than being a very long list of small amounts. So it's a combination of all of those. And I'm very happy to provide the committee with a breakdown of those small ones, but there will be amounts we're getting quite a lot of them are types of grants we receive. We're holding the money because the timing when that money is spent doesn't quite fit the financial years. So we have a number of that nature, but I'm very happy to provide a snapshot breakdown.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Councillor Harvey. You know, we appreciate that there's real challenges when it comes to making savings, and there were huge challenges for Children's Services to make savings, and they obviously failed to make those savings, but we know the reasons why and the pressures. So then you turn to, well, we'll increase income, but then you've already explained that due to COVID and changing behavior, income streams have been affected. So then you think, well, okay, to meet the shortfalls, there's the option of council tax increases. But of course, given the cost of living crisis and the pressures, that's not something that is welcome, I'm sure, by most people. So then you look to your reserves position, and you mentioned the expenditure of some reserves because of the cabinet meeting that occurred, and it was the 29th, it's just last week. Given the pressures and the gap in funding and the real challenge that this budget will present, is it reasonable, do you think, to us just take the position that, unfortunately, despite them being objectives of the administration, there are just some things that you shouldn't be pursuing, not because they're not worth pursuing, but simply because, given the gaps, just can't afford it?
Councillor Harvey?
Well, I think the answer is it's absolutely important to make those considerations, and that's part of what we have been, are, and will be doing through the budgeting round. But it's also a case of getting that balance right in terms of continuing to make progress on things that sometimes are going to take a long time to come to fruition, but you do just have to keep, plugging away at them. So, there's a mix, as ever, and you're quite right, depending on, the urgency and the squeeze in current circumstances. Some things that, we would wish to do, we're probably going to have to say, look, we just can't, we can't do that now. We need to keep that money in the reserves. What Children's is on an improvement journey. That improvement plan for 3 years was, sort of drawn together and submitted in March. And, it's having to be revised now in the light of circumstances. At the moment, we're unclear as to quite what level of investment, beyond that we already expected to be made next year, may need to be made next year in order to maintain the level of momentum that's required to deliver the turnaround in those services. That's a big unknown for us at the moment, and that's one of the things that is going to be being worked through alongside us doing the budget as we put together the improvement and recovery plan, which needs to be ready in December. So for presentation to Ofsted. So there's a massive amount of parallel work that's going on, and I'm really concerned that we've got so many potential calls on on our finances, and uncertainty in terms of getting nothing from government. Yes, you talk about us looking around for where we can get money. We've got 100% council discount at the moment for those households in most difficulty, that's knocking about 10% of our households off our council tax base. You know, getting on for 7,000 households are not paying any council tax at all. And that's a positive decision that we've made and continue to make in order to target support to the people in our communities that are, you know, most needing it, in the same way as we're investing in hardship funds, which go beyond the benefits and the government support that are statutory. And we continue to do that as the right thing. Yes, there are assumptions about council tax increases that Mr. Lovegrove has said, you know, the officers are using as a starting point, because as you saw from the slides, if we get nearly 70% of our income, our net income, from council tax, and you know, we're not getting any increase in business rates, and we're not getting any increase from government funding, with double-digit inflation forced on us, and you know, no appetite from government to, you know, to fund local government to a sensible level, let alone just compensate us in the way that, you know, the public is being compensated in small measure for the impact of fuel costs and inflation on household bills. Local government's being told to suck it up. You know, and that's, you know, a 10% in year increase in costs that we're just being asked to absorb. And when you look at the total budget, 10% turns out to be a really big number. So yeah, we're looking everywhere. You know, where we've got our hands down the cushions on the back of the sofa and seeing what the, you know, the loose changes that's down there. You know, we're going everywhere and anywhere we can go to look for a little bit of income generation here, a bit of cost saving there. But there are going to be really tough decisions that get made through this budgeting round, and it's going to hurt.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. So I think everyone has had a great opportunity to comment on the Appendix 2 and 3 budget papers. So I appreciate everyone's contribution to that. I'd just like to refer to our Statutory Scrutiny Officer. I think I count 3 potential recommendations and an extra information request. But if you could just walk us through what you've noted, please.
Well, Chair, I've noted that the committee have raised the issue of the robustness of the delivery of the emerging savings proposals and how they're being tested out. Also about the breakdown of delayed capital projects to show how much of those is to do with delayed project and how much are to do with projects costing less than anticipated. Also, there was an issue about council's key performance measures to ensure that they include all important outcomes which need to be delivered. The main issues. Do you have any other issues?
I think there was an information request from Councillor Watson.
I have actually emailed Michael, Scrutiny Officer, with a list of things that I think would be really useful.
Would you like to read them out?
Yeah, it might be. It's my wish list. So be warned. Regarding question. Quarter 1 of the budget and performance report of 29th of September 2022, page 51, and the paragraphs that I mentioned, 36 to 39. Herefordshire has an ageing population and a rising number of unpaid carers, and asks for additional information on the following. A request to the Department of Work and Pensions for the number of people in receipt of the carers allowance and up-to-date census 2021 data of the number of unpaid carers in Herefordshire. 2 is, what is the definition of domiciliary care that we understand within Herefordshire Council, and who is in the brokerage team? you know, what agencies are involved in these definitions, you know, does there need to be a glossary? 3, briefing on the increase on placement requests from where to where and why. Point 4, are the talk community hubs delivering domiciliary and or frontline service in adult social care? Is this included in the council budget? Point 5, what are the opportunity costs not included in the council budget delivered by talk community hubs and neighbourhood care schemes? And my point 6 is up-to-date figure on the risk register, CO5 digital transformation, the use of technology to support home care and extend independent living.
So is everyone in the room comfortable that that's an information request that we put?
Chair, I wonder whether Councillor Swindle would want her committee to take that forward, because it's very much in your bailiwick.
I think if it just as an information request, I think that's fair enough that it comes. Otherwise, I'd simply have to make the same requests at my committee, and the end result would be the same. So
as long as you're comfortable,
yeah, and I'd be cited on the response to that. Obviously, so
okay,
done on this as well. But I do take your point, Councillor Stark. But I do have one on the subject of information requests. I wanted there to be some merit, particularly where there is some an anomalous or a figure that makes you go, oh, that's a bit strange. If it is, as Councillor Harvey says, this is simply how life is elsewhere, that we have comparator authority information, because actually, in a sense, data is only meaningful in a context. It's only meaningful if you either have a comparator authority or you're looking at what was before. So you're either a time comparator or another authority comparator. So if we're looking at, say, for instance, turnover, which is what we're looking at, then whilst I don't permit it, doubt what Councillor Harvey says, I think it'd be just useful if we had that within a comparator, pick an authority that's a comparator authority and saying this is what it is there for it's simply how it is in comparator authorities. And where a time comparison would be more appropriate, that we have this is what happened last year or this is what happened, whatever. Because sometimes if you just look at it in isolation, so for instance the pressure demand on adult social care, is it suddenly gone up? Or was it quite high last year and the year before that and the year before that and forever? Has it always been a bit, going up? It's just a longer trend. I think it would just help us understand those numbers in context. So so this is sort of just a general information request where there is an anomalous figure that we have some sort of contextualizing of that.
Okay, so I guess
David.
yes,
I want to just go over the performance one again, if you don't mind.
yes.
You were going to do what you want first and then get back to me?
Yes, please. Can I just see show of hands that everyone's comfortable with Councillor Watson's initial information request on adult social care? Right, so we're all happy with that information request. So I just need clarity on the other 3 points that were raised, whether they are recommendations or whether they're information requests. So for example, these measures, do we want them as an information request to come to us when we look at Q2 budget figures, or as a committee, do you feel like the budget papers that go to cabinet or that get prepared need to be improved to include, for example, these comparators? So I just want to get some clarity from the committee as to which way you'd like to go on that. Information for our next meeting.
Chair, I thought the point the committee was making, particularly Councillor Stark as a Councillor Swindle, was about better performance measures. So I don't want to lose that either. I mean, yes, let's see what they produce for Q2. But then if they're still unhappy, then we've wasted 3 months as a committee and pushing the executive to be working with officers to come up with better KPIs. And Councillor Andrews was making that point as well. Yeah. KPIs that underpin the budget performance as much as anything else. So I think perhaps, it's maybe both.
Perhaps because we do have Q2 on our next work programme meeting, which I believe is November. So perhaps we ask for better comparative KPIs to come to us when we look at Q2. So then we can see what it's like, and then if at quarter two we're still unhappy with it, we can then put forward a recommendation to cabinet.
Okay.
Is everyone comfortable with that proposal? And does that cover your KPI point, councillor Summers?
Not quite. I just want, I'm still concerned with the mention of resources when it comes to performance. When I was in business, I would get the orders in from the salespeople. Those orders would include sizes, quantities, etc., etc. That would get entered into the computer, and it would be sent out. I would get another report from all over the country telling me what sizes were selling where, etc., etc. So that information should be available. If it's not, we need to be looking at our IT. Now, IT is very prevalent. I was in the meetings last week. It's all about IT and all about data. Surely, we have Hoopel as a company that works with us. Surely that information should be there. Anyway, it's just, I do have real concerns about this. I've been here 7.5 years. That information comes through regular. It should be in everything, every email that I have ever made or received is on that. We have it. So that information should be there. So resources, it shouldn't take that much resources to keep it, if we do it all the day. If I wait a month before I read my emails, they're going to be AI. But if we do it every day or every week, it's going to be slower. And that's what we should be looking at. We need to be doing that, not waiting. The information comes through daily. It should be reported daily and go out daily. Anyway, that's enough from me. It's just business is business at the end of the day, and we need to make sure that we're running a business. Thank you.
So I think we need to make, as a committee, a general note that the KPIs need to be better.
Yeah.
There needs to be some and more focused.
There's no
We would like more story around them coming to our next meeting and timely. We need more of a storyline around them coming to our next meeting, and then when we review quarter two, if we still feel like that they're appropriate, then we'll make the recommendation to cabinet. Okay. Yeah.
Shall I write it be now?
So that was the measures. Then we had 2 other points on savings. I think that was a recommendation, I believe. Michael, the one on savings.
Yeah, you already read it out.
Oh, do you mean the undelivered?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
capital programs?
Yeah.
Not delivered, because not delivered because it's coming in the budget.
Yeah.
But that was an information.
That's an information request.
Because you wanted a breakdown of that, didn't you?
Of the, so this is the, are you talking about the capital underspend?
It can be an information request.
Yes, so that would be the information request. And then there was, you had another point, councillor Stark, I believe.
About the robustness and deliverable of sailors. I think they should be not an information request, it should be a recommendation from this committee that we should be seeking assurance that the executive is going to be taking action on making sure that the sailors are robust and deliverable.
I'll make a suggestion as well. I think it's up to the committee, obviously. I think that point should be noted as a suggestion at this stage, right? And an information request. Okay. Because I think so. The budget scrutiny is an ongoing exercise. So at this early stage, I think it's worth noting to take it to the cabinet and the department that suggestion has been made, and we'll get further information seeking assurance on the robustness of those evaluations. That's a technical exercise, but I think it's unfair to put that in the meeting. And also that this suggestion be noted by the committee for further consideration, part of further scrutiny of the council's budget proposals. So you can come back to that in the light of further information. So it might be when you at the next meeting you get that response, that might be something that you want further assurance on if you're not sure by the technical process of evaluation that those proposals.
Were the executives involved in it? Right?
Yes.
Councillor Summers.
A lot of it for me had to do with culture, and we're presently going through, well, we are not personally, but 106 Minutes is being addressed now. It's taken a number of years to get to this point. They've gone through everything. We know now where what Balfour Beatty's got and what they haven't got, etc., etc. But we should have had that information 5 or 6 years ago, and that's what I'm saying. If we have the information constantly, then we can do something about it constantly. And what we should be looking at the 106 Minutes to tell us that, and what have we done to get to where we are now with 106 Minutes? Because from what I understand, we've come a long way in a short time. So whoever done that, maybe we should be looking at that, because we really need to get this sorted. We don't.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, enough.
Okay, bearing in mind that our next meeting is, I think, the 28th November. I think it, so what I'm getting from the committee at the moment is that these 4 items are going to be some information requests that will come to us 28th November. And if we're not comfortable at that point, then we will be raising recommendations to Mr. Budget process.
It's supposed to be working on a slow way.
Yeah.
We're very polite, Christmas.
Yeah, we are.
Very polite.
I'm not.
Well, Mr. Glover, I mean, is that, you've heard, you know, the committees, do you think that is the best way forwards, or would you recommend that we approach it in a different manner?
No, I think that would be the way forward. That's what.
Is that taking the can down the road again?
The minutes will give us the context, so as long as the minutes reflect the discussion that we've had, then the executive cannot ignore the minutes. Call it what you want, Michael, but at the end of the day, we need to be sure that these savings are going to be delivered in the context of what is looking like a very tough and challenging.
And it may be
Yes,
that we've got to move on to the next part of the budget papers, and it might be that it's a recommendation in the next section. Okay, so can I please see a show of hands on that agreement? Fabulous. It is currently 12 minutes past 4. Can I propose that we take a 10-minute break? Come back to Scrutiny Management Board, 7th of October 2022. We're currently still on agenda item 7, budget setting 2023-24 budget setting progress update. I thank all members and also Councillor Harvey for her mammoth effort in answering and responding to questions in the last session. I would now like to focus on Mr. Lovegrove's PowerPoint presentation that he gave to us at the beginning of this agenda item, and the officer's report that accompanies it. And I would like to open to committee for questions. Councillor Stark, thank you very much for kicking us off.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harvey, is she still there?
She's here. She's on screen.
I'm going to go back to my usual bugbear, which I've been banging a drum on for, I think, the past year. And that is the declining share that economy and environment gets from the budget each year. It was down to 16% the last time we discussed it. Can I refer to page 17 of the pack, which is the covering paper? And it's table 2, which is pressures by directorate. That is a very worrying table for me, because if you look at the pressures under community wellbeing and children and young people, you're looking at nearly 20 million. My concern, Chair, and we really do need to talk this through with the executive, is that if we really are up against it when it comes to savings next year, then the one area that will be hit the hardest again will be economy and environment. And I think at some stage, Chair, we need to have some idea of what the impact will be on the widest range of services that our residents receive from the sort of savings that we might have to make here. Because quite frankly, I think that table's frightening, and I don't see how areas like children and young people are going to save 13.7 million. I think they're going to be looking for more investment. I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it. And the one area that they always turn to when it comes to savings or increases in charges is economy and environment. So my question to Councillor Harvey is, in actually trying to address these challenges of a 21 million shortfall next year, how can you assure this committee that the biggest impact of that will not fall on the economy and environment again?
At the moment, the way that we're apportioning targeted savings against the directorates is as a function of their turnover. So we're having a look at it from that perspective as a base case, but we're also having to consider, as you've alluded to, that Children's Directorate may not be in a position to be able to deliver to absorb the cost pressures that are indicated in that table, or indeed make any savings at all. So rather than a base and a stretch case, we've talked about a base and a squeeze case, where we don't expect to get savings from children's at all, and because of the transformational work that needs to go on there. And therefore I can't give you that assurance, Councillor Stark, that it isn't going, that savings aren't going to fall disproportionately on E&E, if by what you mean is disproportionately compared to the overall turnover of the Directorate. You know, it is a sad fact that E&E have repeatedly taken a larger proportion of the savings historically, because those are where the non-statutory care service, the non-statutory services that aren't linked to care are all residing. It's effectively our technical directorate, and that remains the case.
I mean, this goes to the heart of my previous point about robust and deliverable savings. Right away, we have a table there that really is more or less a nonsense, to be honest, Councillor Harvey. You have 13.7 million against children, young people pressures, but that's not going to be turned into savings in that Directorate. And I'm not even sure whether 6.3 million under community and wellbeing will be turned into savings in that Directorate. So you could be looking at 20 million pressure on E&E alone. I mean, that is frightening, surely, Councillor Harvey. We need to start thinking about how we're going to try and manage that.
Well, it can't all fall to E&E. That's simply not feasible. But neither does that table purport to indicate where the savings are to be made. It's headed up pressures, and that's all and exactly what it is. It's indicating where the cost pressures are sitting. It's saying nothing about where the targeted savings will go.
But that is the only indicator we have. It goes back to what Councillor Andrews was saying about having KPIs that give us that early warning about where we might be facing that sort of debate and those challenges within the council.
That's your assumption, Councillor Stark. It's not what the report indicates or what the table says, and I can't be responsible for your assumptions.
Well, that's the assumption I'm making, and I'm not hearing any alternative, Councillor Harvey. That's what I'm saying. If you look at that table at face value, then it does look as if the economy environment could be facing significant savings next year, and as you say, probably infeasible ones.
Everybody is facing significant savings when we're looking at saving almost double the amount of savings that we had to deliver last year, and last year was the biggest single savings delivery that this council has ever had to deliver in a year. I mean this is the situation that we're in. Yes, the cabinet is in a hot seat. We're the ones who are going to have to make and take these decisions and present a balanced budget in some form to scrutiny and then onto council. But fundamentally, this is about denying local government the level of funding that it needs in order to be able to deliver the services that legally central government has placed upon it. And that's the bitter unfairness of all of this. This is not a problem of our making, and yet we are trying to own it. And officers and service areas, year in, year out, are being bent out of shape, trying to, fit a quart into a pint pot. It just doesn't compute, it doesn't work. And the whole premise of redistribution of wealth through general taxation and the funding of local government services through central government funding has been undermined, and eroded to the point of almost, negligence by, 10 years of austerity.
Can I just suggest a request for information at some stage during the year for what is the overall impact that they can predict on E&E, and what does that mean for frontline services across our residents? Because that table is actually a big warning signal for me. Thank you, Councillor Harvey, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think for me, my point is around demand pressures, which was in Mr. Lovegrove's presentation. Under pressures by Directorate and under corporate, it was 2.3. And in the 2023-24 budget setting progress update, it's 2.6. And I just wanted to pick up to actually find out what those pressures are within the corporate demand pressures. And I saw that there is actually starting costs for previously funded posts and an increase in demand and concessionary travel. And sorry to be dumb, but what is concessionary travel? Does that include members as well as staff, or?
Concessionary travel, that's the free bus passes for people that meet a certain criteria. So it's not for staff, it's for our residents.
Okay,
but again, that is demand driven by the number of people making those services.
Okay, and sorry to ask this, because this actually goes back to my previous point around a rising ageing population, but is that in line with our rising population, or is it due to other factors where low incomes? I'm sorry to ask for the detail, and you might not have it at hand, but it tells a story. It goes back to what we keep asking for, this kind of like storyline that we can see the landscape changing. And I know with rural proofing and the rural services network has really done a critical report about DEFRA's rural proofing report or not. And I just think that because we are a rural county, we're even squeezed even more. And I'd like people out there to understand, but could you just share, if you've got that detail to hand, Andrew, about concessionary travel? Is it because of an ageing population, or is it because of people's incomes going down?
Well, I don't have the information at my fingertips, but I think as Councillor Harvey mentioned earlier on, we have to recognise that this post-COVID pandemic situation, people have changed their habits. So we are seeing a reduction in car parking because people are choosing not to pay to park their cars in our car parks now, whether they're choosing not to travel or whether they're choosing to use concessionary travel is something that I don't have the fingertips. I can certainly ask colleagues to produce a short briefing paper about the trends, which I think is what we're getting at, as to why people are changing. I'm not sure we've got that level of intelligence, but let's get the data of what trend analysis we've got, and then you can take it from there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I have a couple of questions as well, and I think they're probably more for you, Mr. Lovegrove, on page 16 of our pack, paragraph 4, so background and context, talking about reserves. I know we've mentioned on reserves a little bit today already, but you say the council maintains a prudent level of reserves to manage future financial risk. And then you go on to say later on that these reserves are deemed to be adequate to support the 22-23 budget. So as a scrutiny member, I guess, how can I assess that the correct level of reserves? So you say that they're a prudent level of reserves, right? How can you demonstrate that to me, and that they're adequate to support the budget, but if you can provide some context around that, I'd appreciate it.
Very happy to. So in terms of the annual budget setting process, I produce a report to full council about the adequacy of reserves So that's what I'm referring to there. So that was presented to full council, and ultimately full council, if they disagree with that, that's clearly where we have the debate in the council chamber and reach a resolution. That didn't happen in February, so people were comfortable with where we were. To add some context to that, part of the work that Grant wanted to do as our external auditors, they look at that and they form an opinion and comment on our level of reserves. So the 2021 report that was sent to the audit and governance a while ago has commentary about that 21-22 reserves. My understanding is that Grant are about to complete their audit work and are hoping to issue their audit finance report by the end of this month to the Audit and Governance Committee, and that will have a commentary on the reserves. So for this committee, I think if you want to have a look at that, wait till it lands at with Audit and Governance and have a look. But my understanding is that they would have flagged that much earlier so if they had a concern about our level of reserves.
Okay, thank you. My other question was around the timetabling and next steps. So if I can direct everyone to paragraph 25, which I think is on page 20 of our pack, with the proposed budget setting timetable. And I guess I've got a couple of questions, but I just wanted to understand, and this might be Mr. Lavery again, what the statutory minimum is for consultation. Because then we've got a number of things: local consultation and capital strategic capital priorities, focus groups, online survey, social media consultation. I know the report that went to Cabinet on the 28th of July also had roadshow and other face-to-face events, which has fallen off this list. The Cabinet report also had these commencing the beginning of last month. So I guess I wanted to understand what minimum statutory requirements are for consultation, and if you have an update on the TBC.
Jack, and in terms of consultation on our budget, the only group that we're required to consult with in legislation is the business community, which is one of those quirks of history because business communities don't pay council tax. So we have to consult the business community about the increase in council tax, when by definition they don't pay because they pay business rates, which is the national set scheme. So that's the minimum requirements that we have to do. And we do that historically through roadshows or meetings with the business community. Good practice, and we always follow good practice, is to consult wider about those things. You're right, when the paper was written, Cabinet considered this earlier in the summer, there was an expectation that we would have clarity from government what we would get, and the impact of inflation. We were still understanding the impact of that. So when that report was written, there was an expectation we would have a balanced budget proposal. Through events have overtaken that, and third conversation, we're not in that place yet. So the proposal is, once we get to that position, we will commence a budget consultation process. That's going to be largely driven by government and when it shares its information about the local government settlement. If we have another budget next month and clarity is brought to what is local government settlement, then we can accelerate the things. But I suspect, maybe it's my glass being half empty, I suspect it'll be December by the time we get there, probably the later half of December. So we will then go out, the proposal is to go out and consult as soon as possible. So that will be over Christmas, which isn't brilliant, but events are really dictated by how government will share its information proposals.
So that really rather concerns me, because if you're only going out to public consultation in December, according to this, we're meant to be reviewing some budget papers at the beginning of December. We're meant to be having a report on the 9th of January. So does that mean that everything is delayed? And I mean, this is a significant risk as well, and I don't see this in the risk section of the report.
It's most other councils, they do that automatically, so they wait till government settlement and go out for consultation. So historically, we've always been ahead of the curve and gone out early. For this budget round, the reality is because of the level of uncertainty about government's proposal, we will have to go at that latter stage. So we're not out of step with other councils. Our predecessors have been out of step, so most other councils have a condensed consultation process. I agree entirely, it's not ideal, and I'd much prefer to go out sooner to consult, but without the information from central government as to the government funding for local government, we'd have anything concrete to consult on.
So I guess this question then has to be to Councillor Harvey in terms of when, Councillor Harvey, do you expect the Scrutiny Management Board to be able to see some budget papers? What are you working towards?
Well, we just don't know. You know, it's as Mr. Lovegrove has just said, we're in the hands of government on this. You know, that everything, you know, to do with the economy, you know, to do with fiscal responsibility, to do with, you know, sort of next year's financial planning for government departments and across the entirety of local government is all entirely up in the air at the moment. It's ridiculous. And, you know, I can sense the frustration, you know, down the wire of the committee on this, but, you know, come and, you know, walk a mile in my shoes.
Thank you. That's why you're the cabinet member. We're sitting here at Scrutiny. But so I mean, I see this as a real risk that we're potentially not going to be having our budget, you know, ready in time for consultation, for scrutiny, to then go to full council. But I don't see that risk bubbling up anywhere in particular. So that's a significant concern for me. Right, I have Councillor Swinglehurst and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm just going to return. I'm sorry we're hopping about like this everyone, but I'm going to return to the capital budget, because you've got the forecast spend position is 64.3 million, which represents an underspend of 69.5 million against a budget of 133.8 million. And that just sort of struck me, the proportion of one figure to the other, that we're underspending more than we're spending. It seems strange. And the question that we'd asked previously about how much of the underspend is projects likely to deliver below the project budget, that's 2.6 million. It's in this paragraph. So therefore 66.9 million is just being carried forward. Now, I'm concerned about this because there are items in the capital spend budget that I think will impact the Directorate. So we're talking about housing and digital transformation and stuff like that. So technology enabled communities. And so there's a kind of implicit cost to revenue budget, but there's also an implicit cost in a delayed delivery, because now where we're at with inflation. So in fact, this capital budget is going to be delivering less. Am I understanding all that correctly? So Ms. Locker, is that a correct interpretation?
I know, John, Councillor Harvey.
I think Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Harvey?
Yes.
Hello. So am I understanding that the relationship of these figures in the capital forecast spend position?
Yeah, I mean, this council has always underspent on its capital budget. You know, it's not a good place to be. The whole point about having a capital budget is because you invest, you know, in capital works which underpin and support the delivery of services or the improvement of facilities in the community or whatever it is. And those things have been delayed. They've been delayed, as I've said, through COVID. They're delayed now because of difficulty in getting building materials, in fuel costs, in, you know, even accessing, you know, bitumen and, you know, tarmac and that sort of thing. So, you know, there's umpteen reasons why it's all behind like the cow's tail. You know, if you want to see how things this year are comparing with years past, we can, you know, provide a longitudinal view so that you can see the degree to which the capital programme has underspent over, you know, the last 5, 7, 10 years.
Apart then from the inflationary situation, which I think we all understand and it can't be avoided, is there any other risks to delivery? It's just taking the time that it takes, but we'll get there in the end.
Well, there's all sorts of risks to delivery. There are manpower risks. There's, grant funding being delayed in decisions coming forward. There's us having to deal with historical overspends on other capital projects, which are, requiring us to find ways of delivering on promises we never made. To provide infrastructure that hasn't now got the funding to be able to deliver on it. We've got compulsory purchase order settlements which are still unresolved with to do with the City Link Road, which are calling into question the funds available for other elements of that project. It just goes on and on. We can have a whole session on the capital programme if you like. It's actually in part and a live example of plans not meeting, not standing up to first engagement with the enemy, and that's one of the reasons why we have an adjustment partway through the year on the capital programme, because it's always necessary for one reason or another, and we've just had one.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Watson and then Councillor Lester.
And then.
What's the
Oh, yeah, and
Never mind.
no, it's
It's ridiculous.
yeah, sorry. Do you want to go now, David?
No, it's fine.
Okay. My question goes back to, sorry, Andrew, your pressures by Directorate. Can you explain what does non-contractual inflation mean? And I note within community and wellbeing it's 5.3, but we're expected to make 0.9 of a saving. And I suppose I don't know, I just worry about we have this outgoing and then we might have a small saving, and we've got this 6.3 pressure, and I just wonder when those figures are correct for, like, on a timeline, like is it for March this year, July this year, and are we confident that they might be underestimated with what we're experiencing now?
So I think the technical question, if you're able to answer, Andrew Ludgrove, and then perhaps Councillor Harvey, the latter point. Thank you.
Yes, and so the technical definition, non-contractual versus contractual inflation. Where we have contracts for, say, the waste disposal contract, we have a contract and that will have the clause in there how inflation is dealt with. So that we would call that contractual inflation. Non-contractual, and it's predominantly in the area where we're purchasing care beds and care services. We have a number of arrangements with care providers, but all of those contracts are negotiated based on the individual. So we renegotiate or have new contracts as people come into our area and we do assess the health care needs. And we will then agree a price with the provider. And it's not like the waste contract where you have a 5-6 year contract and we're locked in. And we don't block book beds, so we are expecting the prices we have to pay for those beds to increase because the care providers aren't putting their prices up. So that's non-contractual elements of that, because we don't have a long-term contract with those providers. It's all on spot purchases based on the care assessment of that person's individual needs. And that's one of the things, if we had Hilary here, she would talk about very much tailoring the care package to that person's needs and what we can do to re-enable them and all those good things that they do. So that's why it's a bespoke service. The trade-off is that's not contractual element.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, and the other is
And what was the question for Councillor Harvey?
and the other is about the what extent could these be underestimated in terms of looking at what's happening with our energy crisis and other costs?
Councillor Harvey.
Well, that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. I mean, we're relying on the judgment of our officers, their professional judgment and expertise in making some predictions here, and they're in constant and regular, daily dialogue with care providers, with care homes, you know, about their costs, about cost inflation. We've just done the consultation exercise to do with fair cost of care, which is aggregated data from the care providers who chose to respond to that, and that's been passed on into central government. You know, it's a judgment call, you know, and you know, we do get a bit of a forward look on the energy side of things because of our relationship with West Mercia Energy and their expertise in buying energy forward on the futures market, and providing some level of, you know, protection for us as a council, but also giving us sight of what the forward, you know, picture looks like for everybody else. But it isn't just energy, it's all sorts of things that are contributing to these cost pressures. It's not just energy, it's across the board.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I apologise, Councillor Summers, we keep missing you, so if you'd like to come in before Councillor Lester.
No, go with Jonathan Lester.
Okay.
You
Councillor
go by the
Lester.
direction of the head table, please.
Thank you. Yeah, with the report, I refer to paragraph 13. It's the bit about children's social care. The cost of placements continues to rise. Obviously, from the cost pressures that have been identified, a huge chunk of those is from children's services. I'm just wondering what challenge is there that's currently going on now to ensure that children that are in care, really, that's the best place for them? Because obviously, if they can be found, you know, if they can return to family circumstances or circumstances where they're not in care, then that's right for them if that can be achieved, obviously, but also that has a huge financial implication as well. So what confidence do you think, Councillor Harvey, you have that there's sufficient challenge in making sure that those costs are minimised by achieving the best outcome for the child?
Oh my goodness, that's a really tough question right now, as we're, you know, working our way through the detail of the Ofsted report, and, you know, all of the feedback that we've had from families and the investigations that have gone on into cases and into the data that we have on our systems. I mean, what we do know is that, you know, from crunching the numbers, that, you know, a reduction of, you know, one child looked after across the year can have an impact of £200,000 on the budget. These are huge numbers. You know, you know, one child not in care can pay for, you know, 20 foster families, you know. So but what we have to do is, you know, our social workers are professionals. They have to make judgment calls on individual cases about what the right thing to do is. You know, the analysis of our children on care plans has shown that, you know, per 10,000 population, we have fewer than the national average children on care plans, or we did, but we had double the national average of children bouncing back onto care plans after they'd been taken off. So there was something wrong with the way that we were assessing, triaging children on care plans and, you know, taking them off, that was, you know, bouncing them back onto the system again. So we need to be really, really careful with you know, what we do next. The feedback that we have is that, you know, once we bring a child into care, they stay with us longer than, you know, than the average. So, you know, we're not fast enough at working with them once they're with us. But that's all part of sorting out what needs to be done in children's. And difficult as our financial situation is, we're not in a place where we're going to be making judgments that put children's safety and lives at risk for the sake of getting them off the looked after children list. So, our social workers will be doing the right thing case by case by case.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Before we move on to Councillor Summers and then Councillor Andrews, I just need to make you aware that we are nearing our 3-hour mark. And I understand I perhaps need to ask your permission to continue. I think we're probably almost nearing completion on this, and I think our next agenda item should be relatively short. So is everyone in agreement that we continue? Yes. Great. So Councillor Summers, please, and then Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Andrew Ludlow. Seniors concessionary passes that are free, is that statutory or is it? And if it is, do we get anything from central government?
It is a statutory service. I don't think we get any support financially from government. Many years ago, there was a separate funding stream. I need to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's now been rolled into our revenue support grant, so we don't get an additional scheme.
Okay, because I'm wondering is if we were always looking for what other ways to get in money. If you charge, no, I'm a senior, so I would have to pay. So I'd say £10 for a senior's pass wouldn't be that bad if we could get away with it. Anyway, it's just one of those things that maybe
I will check with it. I think from memory, it's a national scheme that we have to just implement nationally.
I wasn't sure 100%, but it would be worth knowing, because I do get the question quite often. And it's quite a sum that we're paying out. Now, it must be a year ago. I sat down with Mr. Smith and a couple of others, children's mental health and stuff, and we were talking back then about all ages and that it was coming and what it was going to do. And I asked at the time if it was going to cost us any more money, and the answer back then was no. Seems that that's wrong, and it is. My concern is that children's and adult social care more often than not are entwined. And if we're going, I'd like to know what we're doing with all ages, how we're managing the funding in all ages, because if it covers both, I think we should be getting more out of it somehow. That's just my feeling. I don't know if we can do that, but it just seems to be, if we're going with all ages and we're combining, you don't get a bad child with a good parent very often. Usually there's a problem in the family, so that would be an adult and a child problem. So where are we with that? Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Well, our children's social workers focus on improving the life of the child, but you're quite right in saying that about 90% of our looked after children come into care because of either neglect or emotional abuse. It's not physical abuse or sexual abuse, it's neglect or emotional abuse. And social workers need to take a whole family approach to dealing with those issues, and that's what they do. I mean, their attention is always directed on improving the outcomes for the children, but the sort of services that we have to do with domestic abuse, alcohol and drug abuse, self-harm, all sorts of sort of adult support services do provide the support that some families need in order to address their problems and sort of give a better home environment for their children. We have since 2019 got adults and children's directorates working much more closely together. We're working on all age commissioning for particular services. We have officers from adults who are working closely with children now in a number of different areas, sharing knowledge, experience, contracting approaches, procurement strategies, even looking at, the care provision in the local market, where we're already, sort of strongly committed to, building a new adults care facility, significant care facility owned by the council, but shaping and influencing the residential market for children's placements is going to be really important for us. And getting the learning from adults across into children's is something that is going on already. And I and my cabinet colleagues are really keen to encourage closer and closer working between adults and children, because so many of our young people transition into adults because they still need those support services in adulthood, and we're responsible for looked after children to the age of 25. So even our looked after children who are fit and healthy still need our support as they enter adulthood, in the same way that our own children continue to keep boomeranging back and asking for advice and support, just like any children do.
Very good to hear that there is a joining up, although I'm afraid I don't see a lot of it, to be frank, and I'd like to see more of it. But I want to ask Andrew Lovegrove in particular, the budget seems to separate three at the moment: separates children, separates adults, separates all ages. When are we going to start working towards bringing that together in all ages, like the whole premise was in the beginning? When this first started a year and a half ago, that was the premise, that all ages was going to be joined up more, and the funding would show that. It doesn't seem to be doing that at the moment. If you run three separate companies, you can have three separate CEOs, and you have three separate things going on. I think we need to bring this to a head, and I'm not sure if can we do it through budget. Thank you.
It's a good question. I don't think I'm the right person to ask that. We've got a Director of Children's Services and Director of Adults. It's probably better for them to answer it, how they operate their arrangements. I can build a budget that way, but the services have been the drivers, the accountants, something to achieve.
I can see that, Andrew. My argument is you're in charge of the budget. You're in charge of the money, where the money goes. Okay? If you say this is where the money's going, then someone has to work in those areas to make sure that they're working with you. And that's all I'm asking for. Thank you.
Councillor Summers, could I just say, I mean, in the same way as there are budgets now that are pooled between social care and health, and we work together to identify what the priorities are for budget contributions from both parties, and then collectively how that money is spent on services which connect and overlap with both social care and health service responsibilities. There isn't any point in artificially pooling adults and children's budgets where there is no genuine connection and overlap. That has to come over time, and that's what that middle ground is all about. And over time, more things are likely to connect with one another, but we can't force this, and some areas of work are absolutely 100% children's, and some are absolutely 100% adults.
From my point of view, if you having all ages, that would bring children's and adults under all ages. That's the way I see it, just in black and white. The other question then, as a cabinet member, are the cabinet members for adults and children working together? I mean, and working together with Andrew Lovegrove to discuss their part of the budget and where they should be on the budget. And is anyone looking at all ages in the cabinet? Do we have a cabinet member for all ages?
No, we don't have a cabinet member for all ages because all ages is covered in part in children's and in part in adults by the close working of those two cabinet members, and indeed all cabinet members. You know, transport caters for children and for adults. You know, it's not just in social care, it's all over the shop.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. If I can turn to now Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to give you an opportunity now, Councillor Harvey, to promote your fantastic budget building skills there. So please take it. So in preparation for the next session, can you tell me which bit of this budget do you see as the one that's going to deliver you the biggest success in the first period that we're going to get? And what would you call is going to be your headline item that if we were to say, this is the budget you delivered, this is the one that we're promoting, what would you see as being the one item that you're particularly sort of focused on as a significant item? Now, it may be that Mr. Lovegrove can help you construct that answer, perhaps, or you both got separate opportunities.
Well, I mean, if you constrain it to the first quarter of the next financial year, you know, I think all eyes are going to have to remain on the Children's Directorate, both in terms of managing cost and also in terms of you know, delivering service improvement. You know, the important thing for the Adults Directorate is managing pressures. That directorate's demographic is only growing. You know, we have an aging population, and in Herefordshire we have more older people than both the national average and the regional average. So, you know, talk community and those initiatives which are managing future pressures, including things like building the new care home, and the council getting some skin back in the provider market, are really important in terms of you know, preparing to manage some of those future cost pressures in adults. And for our technical services, it's about the economy, it's about planning, it's about dealing with pollution and climate change. Climate change, hugely important. So there are some really big ticket items in each of the directorates that are really important that we maintain momentum on, despite what we're looking at as, you know, a pretty disastrous financial situation, you know, brought on by lack of funding.
Thank you. So I now have Councillor Stark, followed by Councillor Norman and Councillor Lester.
That's uncanny, Councillor Harvey, because I'm going to talk about government funding. If I refer you to paragraph 23 of the covering paper on page 20, Chair, we've covered most of that except item C, which is continue to lobby for additional government funding. Now, we've not heard anything about that. My worry is we'll sit back here and let others do what they want to do to us. But I read an article the other day from the leader of Norfolk County, happens to be a Tory, but that's neither here nor there, who is at the forefront of lobbying ministers about the 60 million shortfall they've got. What are we doing about that here? Because there's a danger that all these other councils who are facing similar or even greater pressures are going to be knocking on ministers' doors, getting our local MPs inside and making a whole lot of noise. And yet we've had nearly 3 hours on a budget discussion where we talked about how bad the context is. We've got in paragraph 23, one of the mitigations on that is to lobby government. So what are we doing about it? And why aren't we in there fighting? Why aren't we in there lobbying our 2 MPs? Why aren't we in there, not with the LGA, but as Herefordshire County Council saying, hold on a minute, we're one of the most rural, we have a terribly low tax base, we have an aging population, some of our economic indicators are just not good, and that needs to be taken into account when you look at Herefordshire in terms of any central government funding. So, Councillor Harvey, what are we doing about it, and are we doing enough?
Well, I don't know what gives you the impression that we aren't doing something about it. You know, this is your scrutiny meeting. You could have asked this as the first question rather than waited until now. Of course, we're lobbying. We're lobbying on all sorts of different axes. We talk to our MPs regularly. The leader and the chief executive have regular meetings with our MPs. You know, we write to government ministers. You know, on the economy side of things, on the environment side of things, on funding, obviously. Mr. Lovegrove networks with his financial directors, with other councils, and you know, there's a lot of information that gets fed up through the civil servants chain in terms of what the local authorities are facing through the professional officers. Where on the county council's network, and the leader meets weekly on that. There's you know, we're very successful through Councillor Phillips and his work on the rural services network in lobbying on with our colleague councils who are similarly facing sort of deep rurality issues. You know, we're all over it, but you know, as you said, when you've got conservative councils which are, you know, hitting the headlines, that's because, you know, it's a news story, because a conservative council is, you know, making a lot of noise about the damaging effects of conservative, you know, government policies on, you know, local government and local government service delivery. And blue on blue is a news story.
I can see what you're saying, Councillor Harvey, but as a scrutiny management board, I was incited on that. And
why should you be cited on it? You know,
because it's one of the mitigating.
These are private letters.
But it's in your paragraph 23. You've said it's one of the mitigation actions for actually dealing with budget pressures. So I just innocently asked the question. I still think there's still an issue there. Are you confident that we are getting enough airspace as one of the smaller councils in terms of making our case clear and known to central government and through whatever channel we might, and we are being heard?
Well, yes, no, Councillor Harvey, so we can move on.
Yeah, sorry.
Very appreciative.
Well, I mean, we can always do more. It would be great if both of our MPs were, you know, strong advocates for, you know, sort of improving things here in Herefordshire, and we're working, you know, with us across the board on all issues. You know, we could always benefit from, you know, a bit more coherence on that front. But
I guess the question is, Councillor Harvey, are you doing enough? I think that's what Councillor Stark is asking. Are you doing enough?
Am I doing enough?
Well, it's executive.
And then we can move on.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking. Yeah.
I'm always prepared to do more.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Right, I think we have Councillor Norman.
Thank you. Well, I would just quickly follow that up by saying I think it would be reassuring for us. I absolutely take the point that our communications, our publicity isn't always taken up and isn't, you know, it doesn't hit the headlines. But it would be great to see some of it. I don't know how difficult it would be to share it with members, simply so that we knew that this was happening. Not that we're doubting, but it just adds to the confidence that I think we all need, because we're absolutely behind you on this, completely behind you. We have to be pushing at the government and joining everyone else who's doing exactly the same. So I would ask perhaps for some of that to be shared with us, would be very helpful. My actual question was going back to the children's thing. I think possibly we've kind of moved on from that, but I will just very quickly say I'm very pleased that our priority is the children's well-being, not the cost savings. Obviously, where they can be combined is the very best. And I do wonder whether, I think you said that at one point children were being taken out of care, possibly prematurely, perhaps because of the sort of pressure to save funding, but I would imagine that this actually in the long run costs even more. So hopefully that message is getting through.
Well, I didn't say that. Obviously it was a professional judgment that it was the right thing to do, but to have the level of bounce backs that we were the stats were showing indicated that, you know, maybe the work with the family was not, you know, delivering the effects on the ground for whatever reason, and children were coming back onto care plans. I mean, that sort of detailed data analysis is part of what needs to be understood now, because that's a historical picture, as part of working out what needs to happen. But, you know, I have no indication at all that judgments were being made for cost saving reasons. They would have been being made, you know, as professional judgments from social care.
That's very reassuring. Thank you. I think I knew that, if you like, but I think it's important we stress it. Thank you.
Okay, and I think I've only got one further hand, which is Councillor Lester at the moment.
Yeah, I've got my question lined up, but on that last point, I think we have to be very careful to make a distinction between children who and families who have social work intervention and those children who are in care. So yes, there's, as I understand it, care plans. Children have come back onto care plans when perhaps they shouldn't have been taken off those care plans prematurely. But I was pointing up about where children are placed and looked after, and it's the spiraling costs and the pressures of those that was the point. But no, the paragraph 23 of the report, Councillor Stark has rightly said, you know, what's the administration doing about contacting and lobbying central government. But on that, the last point of point G of paragraph 23 is the potential for changing or reducing services that are non-statutory. So my question would be, what services are being contemplated to be either reduced or changed? And you know, what type of services are we talking about? And has there been an assessment done of how residents would be affected if those non-statutory services were reduced, changed, or stopped?
Well, it's very much a work in progress. I mean, the meetings in terms of cabinet members and directors are starting next week. There's a lot of work that's been going on the officer side of things over the back end of the summer and into September, looking at options. And as you know, having you know, been council leader, there's a time when officers are working up options, and there's a time when they're comfortable to start discussing them with the politicians, and we're at that point now. But also you'll be aware that, you know, every and any change to a service will have to have an assessment of equalities impact as part of that, and we need to understand what the impact of any service cuts will be, and make sure that from an equalities point of view, we are not disadvantaging you know, protected groups, and that we understand well what the impact is likely to be. I take Councillor Stark's point that a lot of the services in E&E are ones that are experienced by many residents, as opposed to in the care services area, where only a fractional proportion of our residents receive the benefit of care services. So they are very much more visible as council services to everybody. But we do have to look in the round at you know, what the options are for us delivering services and supporting our most vulnerable, and that is, you know, that's the priority, making sure that we are taking care of, you know, the least able of us, the most vulnerable, and that we are meeting our equalities duties as well as our statutory duties.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think we have one last question from Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harvey. And again, it's been quite a mammoth task. Is there a publicly available list of the non-statutory services that Herefordshire Council delivers? Do we know? Does anyone?
I asked for that right at the beginning.
Yeah, you know, where can we see that list of non-statutory, you know, the statutory services and the non-statutory services? Where can members go for that information?
Well, I think it's not quite as clear cut as that, because some of the statutory services can be delivered in different ways. And, you know, we're also needing to look at that. You know, there are different ways of making those services available without necessarily delivering them as a council. So, you know, again, it's not a case of saying all the statutory services are off, you know, off limits, and, you know, all the non-statutory services are, you know, sort of under the microscope. It's not as straightforward as that. You know, I mean, for example, you know, we've got our refuse services. There's no way that, you know, we're not going to be delivering refuse collection services and disposal services. That just isn't going to happen. So, you know, but we contract those services out. And we buy that in from a contractor who does that on our behalf, but that's still a statutory service.
Councillor Fagan, did you have a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, it was just really that what would be useful is, you know, to understand to distinguish the difference between the two, but also to see sort of what partners there are in Herefordshire that are able to kind of support the delivery of its services, whether they're statutory or not, because it's not information that actually is easily accessible as a councillor. And if we're going to be looking to our partners, it would be quite good to understand exactly who they are and how they fit into that process. Thanks. It was just a comment.
Councillor, Mr. Lovegrove, is that something that is possible, or?
Okay, it will be a question of resources and the priority to where we put our resources. So to give that further analysis, if we had excess capacity, we could do that. My question, I guess, to the committee, given that we need doing all the work on for preparation for the budget and understanding what we can and can't do for the government, start doing this other work, we're probably going to have to start something else. So
But the answer potentially could come out through the work that you're currently doing. So when you do present us with a proposed budget, it could then outline.
Well, I think as Councillor Harvey said, there isn't a black and white answer on this. Everything are shades of a whole range of colours and spectrums, because I think the question you should be asking is about how do we deliver these services rather than is this statutory or non-statutory? Because the reality, I suspect when we dig into most of the services we provide, there is legislation somewhere that says we have to do that service. There are very few purely services that won't meet some sort of legal definition, but I'm not sure setting an arm with lawyers to weigh through every bit of local government legislation is probably the best use of our resources.
And I think the difficulty is perhaps how it's been worded in the officer's report in terms of changing or reducing services for non-statutory services. And so I think that's perhaps sort of led us all down a garden path, perhaps. Any more comments then before we close this session on budget? If there are no further hands, if I can just refer to the Statutory Scrutiny Officer just to summarise if there have been any information requests or points to note.
Chair, so I've noted that the committee, what has been proposed in the committee, receive information on a number of areas. One is on the overall estimated impact expected on the economy and the environment budget. Another is on measures being taken to lobby government on the need for additional funding in Herefordshire. A summary report on that. Another issue, which I think Councillor Harvey suggested to the committee was a longitudinal view of capital projects performance. That capital projects budget performance underspends being provided in a summary report to show comparable performance over time. Another issue that the committee has previously raised, which may be worth noting at this stage, is requiring at a future meeting a report on treasury management and the minimum revenue provision policy for the council, so that that's included in the budget papers. There's a question as to whether you want to look at that on your meeting scheduled for 28th of November, the next meeting, which is scheduled to look at budget performance reports, or on the 2nd of December meeting, where we're going to look at budget, a further meeting on budget proposals and scrutiny of different departmental budgets.
Well, I think if members are happy with the items for information request, I think the actual date of when we look at it, I think has to be determined by Councillor Watson and myself together with you to schedule it appropriately. But is everyone in agreement with the information requests that the Statutory Scrutiny Officer has identified? Councillor Stark?
No,
Fabulous. Right. I think that brings us to the close of. Oh, sorry, Mr. Lovegrove.
Chair, the treasury management issue, and it was raised at the Cabinet last week about where we're investing, I suppose, given everything that's going on in the financial markets. So just want to bring that to your attention. And with the MRP again, what's happening with inflation, those arrangements. So if we could find a time to run those before we get to Christmas, that would be really helpful. I was speaking to Link Treasury Advisors. They're very happy to run an all-member training session as well, or as part of that process. So really, we can have the conversation offline, but it would be really good for those two items to be looked at, given everything that's happening in the world.
Thank you very much. So I think that concludes agenda item 7. So that leaves one agenda item left, which is the progress report. And I would like to invite the Statutory Scrutiny Officer to introduce that, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a brief information report back to the committee. It's a standard item now on scrutiny committees to provide a progress report on matters raised at the previous meeting and any information requests and scrutiny recommendations to the Cabinet and progress on those. So scrutiny recommendations to the Cabinet would be the executive response and the progress in procuring an executive response to those. And information request would be information provided back to the committee, but ideally before the next meeting. At the previous meeting, there were information requests on the Rethinking Governance programme and matters relating to communication scrutiny on the web pages, which we don't have full responses for yet, so that would be added to a tracker on the next version of the report, ideally along with responses to those, which we will follow up. Also, there will be further consideration of scrutiny work plans by the scrutiny committees, particularly the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee in the light of the Ofsted inspection, which again, once the scrutiny committees met next week to consider this, will be reported back to the Scrutiny Management Board in the next version of this report in November.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any comments? I think from my perspective, I did find it a little bit, I always like things in tables, or I found it a bit difficult to read and digest. So I think between now and the next report, I'll probably work with the Statutory Scrutiny Officer to see if we can make it more easily digestible. But are there any comments for today? Let's start.
It's just a quick one about resources again. TNF studies require officer support, and we're not getting clear signals that officer support is available. I mean, one TNF group that has suffered, although we haven't come to a decision on it, but would suffer, is the one in River Wye. We've had a request for one in Litter. So I think at some stage this committee, not today, but this committee will have to look at the impact of 5 committees plus potential TNFs And are we actually being resourced appropriately by the executive to actually be effective in going forward? I just would like to put that down as a marker for discussion under progress at some stage, because I can't see any other item, Michael, under which it could come, to be honest.
Yes, so it can be raised under that item and also the scrutiny committee's work plan items.
Yeah, it could do so.
Consideration.
Because I don't think,
Task and control.
I don't think the 5 committees structure has been properly resourced.
Okay, thank you, councillor Stark. I think we can perhaps put that on something that we can discuss on the next progress report when we have the work programme through. Any other comments on this agenda item? Right, so I think I need to move that the progress report and scrutiny information requests, scrutiny reports and recommendations and other matters raised by the committee be noted. And I see a show of hands. Thank you. So date of the next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday, the 28th November. Thank you very much, everyone. 5:32 for this meeting.